Marineford was one of the most legendary battles in One Piece history, a war that changed everything. But what if, in the middle of that chaos, the entire battlefield went silent in a single breath? Akainu's magma fist is inches from Luffy's face. Ace is already falling. The screams are deafening. Then suddenly, the sky itself turns, the flags snap backward, the execution platform groans, and one invisible hammer of wind crashes down. Magma freezes in the air, stopped dead, not by ice, not by hockey, but by pressure so overwhelming that even Sakazuki's arm can't move another millimeter. Everyone looks up. The Marines, the pirates, even Sengoku. Standing on the execution platform, cloak whipping like it's about to tear off his shoulders, is Monkey D. Dragon. No introduction, no speeches, just presence. In the original timeline, Odd Dragon never shows his face at Marineford. But in this timeline, the man the world calls the most wanted is also, undeniably, the strongest being alive. Here's the kicker. We're not talking dangerous because of ideology. We're talking raw, absurd power, stronger than Kaido's so-called strongest creature durability, stronger than Shanks's Conqueror's haki, stronger than Blackbeard with 2 devil fruits, stronger than the admirals working together. And yes, stronger than the shadow sitting on the empty throne, Imu themselves. What happens to Marineford when the ceiling of the entire power scale drops into the middle of the plaza? Does Akainu get one shot by a compressed storm that erases magma from existence? Does Whitebeard, already dying, stand shoulder to shoulder with Dragon? Or does Dragon's very aura push even the Yonko back? What if Luffy survives not because of luck, but because the apex predator of the world decided that his son's story cannot end here? Now zoom out. If the strongest character isn't a Yonko, but the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army, then the whole Great Pirate era is a distraction, you see? The Yonko system? Just a smokescreen while the real final boss is tearing down kingdoms in the shadows. What if the Marines are secretly more afraid of Dragon than of any pirate flag? And if Dragon already eclipses everyone, does Luffy ever truly surpass his own father? Or does the story of One Piece become a race to catch up to a man who's already at the finish line? Imagine a rapid-fire reel of alternate timelines. Dragon arriving instead of Shanks at Marineford, and walking straight through 3 admirals as the wind itself refuses to let their attacks land. Dragon stepping into Mary Jouais during the reverie, celestial dragons pinned to the ground by air so heavy they can't even scream. Dragon soloing an entire Yonko crew, scattering commanders like debris in a hurricane. Dragon locked in a world-shaking clash with Imu above the red line, while Luffy fights for the Pirate King crown below. So ask yourselves, how different do Annie's Lobby, Dressrosa, Whole Cake? Wanna feel if, in the background of every arc, the true apex monster is a revolutionary whose very existence makes the world government tremble? Let's dive into the timelines where Dragon isn't just wanted, he's unbeatable. Defining the monster. What strongest in One Piece actually means. If Dragon is unbeatable, we need to be clear what that actually means. Not strongest in his neighborhood. Strongest in One Piece means he's the ceiling, the final benchmark. The guy even monsters look at and go, yeah, we're not winning that. So, before we race into Marineford or the final war, we need to lock in the rules of this timeline. In the original timeline, Kaido is hyped as the strongest creature with absurd durability. Shanks is the hockey demon who can clash with Whitebeard and shut down Green Bull with presence alone. Blackbeard is walking broken game design with the Yami Yami and Gura Gura combo. And above all of that lurk Imu and the Gorosei as the hidden apex threats. But what if Dragon has to surpass every single one of them just to qualify for this video's premise? That's our baseline. If Kaido tanks, Dragon no diffs. If Shanks flexes Conquerors, Dragon's haki makes the sky itself panic. So what does that Dragon look like? First, haki. We're talking top-tier Conquerors that can clash with Shanks and still crush weaker wills across entire islands. Armament so intense it can crack Kaido's scales and block Gura Gura shockwaves. And observation sharp enough to read Kizaru-level light speed patterns and future sight like it's casual. On top of that, a devil fruit that explains all those coincidental storms around him. In this timeline, Dragon wields a mythical zone, or Logia adjacent wind or weather fruit. turning the battlefield into his home turf, redirecting buster calls, snuffing magma, and weaponizing the climate the way Enel weaponized lightning. But here's the kicker. He's not just a stat monster. He's the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army. So we're giving him strategic genius on par with Sengoku. Except instead of defending the system, he's breaking it. He doesn't just throw punches, he weaponizes kingdoms, propaganda, and economics. He can topple a nation with a storm, or with a leaked secret. You see, that's what makes him terrifying. He's as dangerous in a war room as he is on the front line. Now, how are we playing this timeline? We're not rebooting One Piece from Chapter 1. Luffy still grows up in Fuchsia, Ace still goes to sea, Marineford still happens. The question we're asking is, what if Dragon always had this level of power, and the world reacted accordingly, while the major canon beats stayed intact unless Dragon logically breaks them? If an event can survive a dragon this strong, it stays. If it can't, it gets rewritten. That leads to the big questions we'll chase across arcs. Does the Yonko system even survive when there's a secret fifth force who could solo a crew? Does Ace ever die at Marineford when the world's strongest man's dad is watching? Does Luffy's journey get overshadowed by his father's legend? Or does Dragon's existence actually force Luffy to become even more insane to stand beside him? And when the final war comes, is it still Luffy versus the world government? Or has this story shifted into Dragon versus the entire system with Luffy as the wild card? Let's dive into this as a connected saga. We'll move through multiple phases like episodes in one giant what if. A pre-Marineford world balance where the Yonko and Marines quietly fear Dragon. A reimagined Marineford where a single gust of wind can stop Akainu's fist. With a reverie and Mary Jawa's upheaval, where Dragon finally walks into the Holy Land. And an altered final saga where Imu, the Gorosei, Luffy, Blackbeard, and this Peak Dragon all collide. And in the next section, we start where everything in One Piece shifts. The Age of Whitebeard, and the fragile balance that tried to hold a monster like Dragon in the shadows. Before the storm, Canon Dragon versus our Dragon. The Age of Whitebeard tried to hold the seas together. The Yonko system tried to keep the chaos balanced. But there was always one name sitting outside that equation: Monkey D. Dragon. In the original timeline, Dragon is a ghost with a bounty, the supreme commander of the Revolutionary Army, the world's most wanted man. We see him in Logetown wrapped in a cloak, a storm raging. The execution of Luffy interrupted by lightning and wind that feel way too convenient to be coincidence. He's Garp's son, he's Luffy's father, and yet he has almost no on-screen combat feats at all. You see, we're told his organization topples kingdoms, frees nations, and directly opposes the Celestial Dragons. We meet Ivankov, who can tank Magellan and escape Impel Down. We meet Kuma, who can casually repel the Straw Hats, split ships, and spam island-busting Ursus shocks. These monsters all answer to Dragon. And still, Oda keeps him in the shadows, just watching from the sidelines while Marineford burns. But what if those tiny moments weren't just flavor? In Logetown, Luffy is about to die. Suddenly, the wind shifts, the rain hits, the lightning strikes the platform instead of his neck. Dragon walks through a gale like it's nothing. In canon, it's a hint. In this timeline, that storm is the smallest glimpse of his true power. Here, our Dragon is not just a political threat. His combat power alone could match or exceed an entire Yonko crew. Weather isn't just a cool entrance effect. It's his battlefield. Continental-scale pressure shifts, jet stream blades, hurricanes that can erase fleets the way Whitebeard erased Marineford's plaza. If Kaido is the strongest creature, this dragon is the force of nature. The creature's prey doesn't wake up. Is that really so crazy? Look at Oda's pattern. Shanks was hyped for hundreds of chapters before we saw a serious swing. Imu and the Gorosei are endgame pieces who barely move on screen, yet their influence warps the whole story. The higher you sit on the food chain, the less Oda shows you, until it's time. So, and if the leader of the one group actively dismantling the world government is this secretive, why wouldn't he be at least on par with the strongest pirates, if not beyond them? Here's the kicker. The world government's fear suddenly makes perfect sense. They aren't just scared of Dragon's ideas. They're terrified that the single strongest force alive is tied by blood to the man with Nika's fruit. In the original timeline, Every storm felt like atmosphere. But in this timeline, every storm you saw, every panicked reaction to Luffy's lineage, was the quiet footstep of a monster. And when that monster finally steps out of the shadows at Marineford, that's where everything you thought you knew about strongest in the world gets rewritten. Rebuilding the power scale. Where does Dragon sit above Kaido and Shanks? Or so if Dragon is the monster behind every storm, where does he actually sit on the food chain? You see, to put him at the very top, we have to break the old ceiling first. And that means tearing apart Kaido's throne as strongest creature in the world. In the original timeline, Kaido's whole legend is built on suicidal dives from Sky Islands, execution attempts that always fail, and that absurd mythical Zoan that turns him into a living natural disaster. He drinks, he falls from the clouds, he tanks everything. But what if Dragon is the man who doesn't just tank disasters, he commands them? In this timeline, Kaido is still raw, still overwhelming, but Dragon eclipses him in both brute force and versatility. Kaido becomes the storm. Dragon becomes the climate itself. Let's dive into how that actually looks on a battlefield like Marineford. Kaido shrugs off island-busting hits. Dragon casually erases a buster call by cranking air pressure so high the shells disintegrate mid-air. Kaido's roar shakes the sky. Dragon twists the jet stream so an entire fleet suddenly can't move, grounding navies the way Enel shut down Skypiea. Kaido dominates one front. Dragon rewrites the entire map. Then there's Shanks. In the original timeline, Shanks walks into Marineford and the war stops. His Conqueror's haki clashes with Whitebeard, knocks out fodder for miles, and later he just looks at Kid and Killer and their ambition evaporates. That's terrifying. But here's the kicker. If Dragon is truly the strongest, his haki can't just rival Shanks. It has to overwhelm whole factions at once. And picture this timeline's Marineford climax. Akainu charging, Kizaru in the sky, Aokiji freezing the bay. A single step from Dragon, and a wave of Conqueror's haki slams down so hard that Vice Admirals drop, Pacifistas glitch, and even Admirals feel their knees buckle for a second. Shanks can end a war. Dragon can pressure two Yonko and the Marine top brass simultaneously, just by existing on the same battlefield. And we're not done. Blackbeard is stacking endgame hacks with the Yami Yami and Gura Gura, while Imu sits above the Gorosei like a hidden final boss. But what if there was one man who could walk into Mary Joaz alone and still be a legitimate threat? In this story, Dragon is the only individual who can challenge Imu one-on-one and still be the natural predator to Blackbeard's schemes, or disrupting his darkness with crushing atmospheric pressure and blowing apart quake shockwaves with counterwinds. To sell that, his devil fruit can't be mid. We're talking either a wind Logia that gives him absolute control over air, or a mythical Zoan storm dragon that fuses wind, lightning, and rain. He manipulates pressure, temperature, and weather fronts so precisely he can redirect Fujitora's meteors, smother Sakazuki's magma with oxygen-starved vacuums, or turn an entire sea into a maelstrom that shreds battleships before they even see him. So when characters say the world's strongest in this timeline, they're not thinking Kaido, Whitebeard, or even Shanks anymore. They're whispering about a revolutionary whose very presence can rewrite battlefields and climates. And if that's the new ceiling, what happens when that ceiling crashes down on Marineford all at once? The world before the quake. Canon Marineford as our baseline. To understand how hard this new ceiling is about to crash down, we need our baseline. We need Marineford exactly as it was. No dragon, no intervention, just the greatest execution trap in history. In the original timeline, it all starts with one decision. Ace hunting down Blackbeard. Teach defeats him, chains him, and hands him to the Marines as a ticket to the warlords. Sengoku doesn't just see a prisoner, he sees an opportunity to end an era. Public execution. Portgas D. Ace, son of the Pirate King, on live broadcast to the entire world. You see the plan instantly. Kill Roger's bloodline and use Whitebeard as bait. So Marineford becomes a stage. As the three admirals, Akainu, Aokiji, Kizaru, sitting beneath Ace like execution pillars, Garp and Sengoku on the platform, the old guard watching the next generation burn. Around them, the warlords, Mihawk sharpening his blade on fate itself, Doflamingo laughing at the chaos, Hancock secretly rooting for Luffy, Kuma standing like an empty wall. This isn't just a battle, it's a message carved into the age of pirates. Then the sea itself rebels. Whitebeard arrives with his fleet, Moby Dick bursting from beneath the waves, division commanders like Marco, Yozu, Vista, and the allied captains all lined up behind the man called the Strongest. The first clash is instant and brutal. Whitebeard tilts the ocean with his Gura no Mi, Admiral's counter with magma, ice, and light, and suddenly Marineford is a shattered arena of tsunamis, icebergs, and laser fire. But here's the kicker. Even at his peak, Whitebeard is sick. We watch him clutch his chest, suffer a heart attack mid-battle, and still swing like a monster. Betrayal hits from within as Squard's blade pierces him, manipulated by Akainu's lies. The war is a meat grinder, and Whitebeard is bleeding before it even really starts. Into this hell, Luffy crashes the party. Fresh from Impel Down with a mismatched crew of prisoners and allies, Crocodile, Ivankov, Jinbei, Buggy, he drops from the sky like pure chaos. In the original timeline, his presence scrambles every plan. He sprints through giants, pacifistas, and admirals, driven by one goal: reach Ace before the blades fall. We hit the critical beats fast. Oars Jr. falls. The execution is moved up. Luffy pushes to the platform with help from everyone: Whitebeard's men, Ivankov's miracles, even Garp hesitating for a split second as Grandfather collides with Marine. Ace is freed. Chains shatter. For one breath, it feels like the story has changed. And then Akainu moves. He baits Ace, aims for Luffy, and drives a magma fist through Ace's chest. Ace dies protecting his little brother, and Luffy breaks, screaming, silent, mentally shattered. Whitebeard answers with his final stand, declaring that the man who will challenge the world is still out there. He dies on his feet, body full of wounds, no scars on his back. Shanks arrives to slam the brakes on the bloodshed, forcing everyone to stop before the balance is completely destroyed. Marineford becomes a fixed point. The war that ends Whitebeard, crowns Blackbeard, scars Luffy, and defines the post-time skip world. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take that exact powder keg, and in this timeline, drop the strongest man alive, Monkey D. Dragon, right into the middle of it. What happens when the world's most wanted man steps onto that stage before Shanks ever arrives? Butterfly Point, where our timeline breaks away. This is the exact moment our timeline snaps, not when Shanks walks in at the end, not when Blackbeard laughs over Whitebeard's corpse. It breaks the instant Akainu's magma fist comes down to erase Ace, or Luffy, from the story forever. In the original timeline, you remember how it plays out. Garp freezes. Sengoku holds him back. Ace throws himself in front of Luffy, takes the hit, and dies in his little brother's arms. Luffy is mentally shattered. Whitebeard spends his final strength raging against the Marines, and Marineford becomes the graveyard of an era. That chain of events defines everything that comes after. But what if that chain never gets the chance to form? What if the strongest man in the world refuses to let that fist land? We stay on that single frame. Akainu's arm raised, magma dripping, Luffy and Ace too slow to react. Everyone is screaming. The battlefield is chaos. And then, instantly, the war itself seems to flinch. The sky doesn't just darken like a normal storm. It buckles, clouds twist into a spiral over the plaza, and a crushing wind pressure slams down on Marineford like a giant, invisible hand. Akainu's magma fist doesn't reach its target. It stops, mid-swing. The flames gutter and stretch sideways, pinned by a horizontal cyclone that wasn't there a second ago. The execution platform groans as steel beams warp. Wood splinters, and the whole structure bends away from Luffy and Ace, as if the island itself refuses to let them die. You see admirals bracing themselves just to stay standing. Kizaru's light scatters, Kuzan's ice cracks under the air pressure, and vice admirals are forced to their knees. The bay's weather flips in seconds. Blizzard shards, sideways rain, and razor-sharp gusts carving the tsunami walls that Kuzan froze earlier. This isn't just bad weather. This is controlled, precise. A will pressing down on Marineford that even Whitebeard's Quake fruit couldn't replicate. In this timeline, there is no hesitation from Garp to define the scene. there is Dragon. Here's the kicker. The trigger for all of this wasn't just Ace's execution. Dragon has been hearing reports for hours. And the world government isn't only parading the son of his old rival, Whitebeard. They're also letting Luffy, his own son, charge straight into a public slaughter. That combination shatters his long-game Shadow War strategy. This isn't another kingdom to topple from the dark. This is the world government trying to crush the two bloodlines most likely to change the world, on live broadcast. So he intervenes early, not as a rumor, not as a storm in the distance, as the storm. Marineford, ladies and gentlemen, just met the true, strongest creature on the planet, and it isn't Kaido. It's the man the government fears more than any Yonko. And if this is the moment Dragon stops hiding, what happens when the admirals realize they're no longer the top of the food chain? Because the next move he makes doesn't just save Ace and Luffy. On it rewrites who owns the war itself. Storm God descends, Dragon's power. Finally unleashed. And the way he rewrites it starts with the sky. The drums you hear at Marineford now, they aren't the drums of liberation. They're the drums of thunder. The entire soundscape of the war just changes. Cannons are drowned out by rolling booms as black clouds slam together overhead, the air itself vibrating so hard that even giants feel it in their bones. Pressure drops in an instant, everyone's ears pop, and both Marines and pirates have to brace just to stay standing as invisible blades of wind carve trenches through ice, steel, and stone. In the original timeline, the storm was just background, atmosphere. But in this timeline, the storm is Dragon's language. Each gust is a command. Each lightning strike is a warning. A single step forward, and his haki detonates. You see bodies fall before anyone even understands what's happening. A black-red wave of Conqueror's haki tears across Marineford, and thousands instantly collapse, eyes rolled back, foam at their mouths. These aren't random fodder either. Veteran Marines who survived the New World, hardened pirates who sailed under Whitebeard for decades, supernova-level captains that snuck into the war, all gone in one pulse. Even the monsters feel it. The admirals don't just stand there coolly. They visibly brace, boots grinding into the shattered plaza as that pressure presses down on their chests. Kizaru's lazy grin tightens, Aokaji's breath fogs heavier, and Akainu's jaw clenches as cracks spiderweb through the magma at his feet. Up on the Moby Dick, Whitebeard's own commanders stagger, to sweat beating as they realize this isn't just another king on the sea. This is a king of the world, and then the weather starts obeying. Akainu swings, a molten fist meant to erase Dragon from the battlefield. But what if magma met a storm that refused to be burned? The temperature around Sakazuki plummets so fast his own lava hardens mid-swing, going from blazing red to dull, brittle black. When Dragon's wind hits it, that unstoppable magma shatters like glass, scattering slag across the ruined plaza. Kizaru fires a rain of light down at the execution platform to finish Ace and Luffy. Suddenly, those beams hit a dense, swirling mist that wasn't there a second ago. They refract, bend, and scatter, ricocheting harmlessly into the sky or blasting empty towers instead of hearts. Light itself can't find a straight path in Dragon's storm. Aokiji tries to lock the sea and the plaza in ice again, but the pressure fronts keep shifting. Sheets of ice form, then instantly crack and explode as compressed air tears through them, turning his frozen ocean into a field of jagged, useless shards. This is where the myth catches up to the man. The Marines whisper "Dragon of the Storm" like a curse. The pirates say he's the man whose bounty broke the scale, the one the world government can't even print a proper number for. He doesn't just stand in the same league as Kaido and Big Mom. His entrance makes theirs look small, like local tempests compared to a world-ending hurricane. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, if Dragon was the strongest in One Piece, Marineford would look less like a war and more like a natural disaster with a human core. Thus, this is the fantasy payoff fans have been waiting on for years. The true apex of the Will of D walking straight into the stage where Ace dies and saying, "No." But here's the kicker. When one man can bend the weather, crush armies with haki, and humiliate 3 admirals at once, how do the world government, Whitebeard, and even Luffy react when they realize the storm isn't leaving after Marineford? Because this is just Dragon arriving. The real question is what the balance of the entire world looks like once he decides to stay. Prophecy twisted. Whitebeard's final words in a world with Peak Dragon. And this is where Whitebeard's final words hit completely differently. In the original timeline, that speech at Marineford is pure prophecy. I'm the man Roger is waiting for. The one who will challenge the world. The declaration that one day, someone will appear, carrying centuries of history on his shoulders, and that when that treasure is found, the world will be turned upside down. But what if, in this timeline, those lines are doing double duty? One name for the light that frees the seas, and one name for the storm that smashes the system. You see, Roger talked about the man to Whitebeard. Whitebeard repeated it to Sengoku. And who else was sitting in that generation's inner circle? Garp. In this timeline, those three all know exactly how terrifying Dragon really is. Roger sees Luffy as the future man who will change the world, symbolically. But Dragon as the one person alive who can actually topple the world government head-on. Whitebeard looks at Marineford and feels Dragon's haki shaking the sky and realizes the physical hammer and the emotional key are father and son. Let's dive into the deeper lore angle, because this is where it gets wild. Dragon isn't just strong because he trained a lot. Tie him straight into the Will of D and the Void Century. In this timeline, Dragon learns the truth of the ancient war, the original alliance that challenged the Celestial Dragons, and how Joy Boy failed to protect the world. That knowledge doesn't break him. It weaponizes him. He doesn't just become a revolutionary leader. He decides to become the single most dangerous fighter alive, the living answer to an 800-year-old injustice. Suddenly, past scenes feel like they were screaming this at us. Garp casually mentioning, "My son, the revolutionary dragon," like it's nothing. Well, that's a marine hero trying to keep a lid on the world's ultimate nuke. Sengoku's veins popping when he learns Luffy is Dragon's kid. In this timeline, that's not just shock at lineage, that's panic that the Will of D's strongest fist and its freest smile share the same bloodline. And the Revolutionary Army's quiet confidence, from Sabo to Ivankov, becomes way clearer. They know that if Dragon ever cuts loose for real, admirals, seraphim, even the Holy Land itself, are on a timer. Here's the kicker. Whitebeard's final declaration about the coming war stops being a vague prediction and turns into confirmation. He isn't just believing that someone will come. He's dying, knowing that Dragon already exists at the peak, and that Luffy's rise will give that power a signal to move. When he roars that the One Piece is real, in this timeline, he's not just inspiring pirates, he's lighting the fuse for the strongest man alive to unleash the final storm. So when Whitebeard falls, the world thinks an era ended. But what if that was actually the moment two eras, Dragon's War and Luffy's journey, finally synced up? Because once those paths cross, Marineford is just the prologue. Rewriting the first clash, Whitebeard, admirals, and a Storm King. Marineford thinks it just watched an era die with Whitebeard's final quake. The dust hasn't even settled. The cheering hasn't even started. And then the sky itself refuses to move on. Clouds twist. The execution platform banners whip backwards against the wind. Everyone feels it before they see it. In the original timeline, this is where Shanks walks in and calls the war off. But what if, in this timeline, the man the world fears most walks in instead? Monkey D. Dragon steps onto the battlefield, not with fanfare, with silence. The roar of Marineford just cuts. A single pressure-packed gust flattens flames, shatters falling ice, and pushes back the smoke from Akainu's magma like it's nothing. You see Akainu bracing his feet on the plaza, cloak snapping, teeth clenched because the air itself is pushing him. Instantly, we get a three-way tension that never existed in the original story. On one side, Whitebeard's fading titans, the strongest pirate of the old era, still looming like a dying mountain. On the other, the admirals, the blades of the world government, lined up beneath the execution platform. And now, cutting straight down the middle, the strongest man alive who doesn't belong to either world. Whitebeard looks up through the blood and the cracks in his visor, and he laughs. Just once. A low, rattling sound. So, Garp's son finally steps out, huh? It's not surprise, it's recognition. The old man who bet on a future man who will change the world is staring at the one person who might already be beyond him. Behind him, Marco, Jozu, Vista, everyone are freaking out. Another monster? Now? While Pops is dying and Ace is still on the stand? Meanwhile, the admirals are recalculating in real time. Akainu's face goes from bloodlust to pure, volcanic rage. A traitor of the world government standing over their proudest execution? He's ready to charge. You can see the magma boiling off him. But even he hesitates when the air pressure spikes around Dragon's cape. Kizaru tries to play it off. Ooh, this is scary, nah? What, the most wanted man in the world showed up personally? But his light form doesn't move an inch. And Aokiji? He just narrows his eyes. This is the man whose ideology can actually erase everything they're standing on. Here's the kicker. The tactics snap into place faster than any punch. Sengoku doesn't even bother with a speech. All units, defensive formation, pacifistas, front of the platform, seal all live transmissions now. In this timeline, the world government cannot let the world see Dragon bend Marineford's sky. Marines pull back into layered walls of shields and rifles. Pacifistas form a steel ring around Ace and the platform like a mechanical fortress. Denden Mushi eyes slam shut one by one. The broadcast cuts, leaving the world with a frozen image of Whitebeard's fall and hiding what comes next. Dragon finally speaks. I'm not here for your war. His gaze sweeps over Whitebeard, then the admirals, and finally lands on the brothers. I'm taking Ace and Luffy out of here. One sentence. One objective. Suddenly, Marineford isn't about executing a pirate anymore. It's about one question. Who can stop the strongest man in the world from a simple extraction? And the first person to move isn't who you'd expect. Wind versus magma. Dragon's first direct clash with Akainu. Because the first person to move is Akainu. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't posture. The man who, in the original timeline, walked straight through Whitebeard's quake and Ace's flames just launches himself at the brothers again. Magma arm cocked back, screaming about justice. That iconic charge toward Ace and Luffy plays out exactly the same. Until it doesn't. Because this time, the fist never lands. A shockwave of wind explodes between them, and Dragon is just there. No teleport. No flashy entrance. One moment, Akainu's fist is inches from Luffy's face. The next, it's buried in Dragon's bare hand, armament-coated skin black as obsidian, wrapped in a spiraling cyclone. You see the magma flare, roar, and then hiss. It gets peeled away, strand by strand, dispersed into steam like cigarette smoke under a fan. Everyone freezes. These are the same Marines who watched Akainu melt an entire frozen bay, who saw him tank Whitebeard's island-splitting punch, who saw half a face get blown off and the man keep walking. But what if, right in front of them, that same fist doesn't just get blocked? It gets crushed. The air around Dragon's grip compresses, the atmosphere itself folding in. Akainu's magma arm is forced narrower and narrower until the flames snuff out with a sickening crack. Here's the kicker. Akainu is the one pushed back. He skids, boots carving trenches in Marineford stone. Instantly, he erupts. The plaza becomes a volcano field, magma pillars detonating around Dragon, massive molten fists raining down like a meteor shower. In the original timeline, this is the nightmare sequence where Ace dies and Luffy's chest is branded. But in this timeline, Dragon just raises his other hand. Cyclones bloom. Every single magma fist that should have erased pirates and Marines alike gets hooked by violent crosswinds and ripped upward. Marineford's sky turns into a hellish fireworks show. Lava comets twisting, bursting harmlessly in the clouds, raining down as cooled stone. It looks apocalyptic, but nobody is burning. The battlefield stares up, realizing this isn't weather luck. This is control. And Dragon isn't just a wall, he's a blade. He flicks his wrist and razor-thin wind slashes cut through Akainu's magma body like it's nothing, carving clean lines through the volcanic mass and forcing him to constantly reform. Localized vacuum zones pop into existence around Sakazuki's shoulders and chest, choking his flames, smothering his heat. Every time Akainu tries to re-engage, a Haki-infused gust hits him like an invisible giant, punting the future fleet admiral candidate through buildings, warships, even chunks of the execution platform. You see the power scale re-anchor in real time. This is the man who killed Ace being manhandled. This is the admiral who reshaped Marineford being redirected like a wayward firework. And if Akainu is supposed to be a top tier, Dragon is the ceiling everyone slams into. And as the smoke clears and Sakazuki drags himself out of the rubble, the real question hits everyone at once. If this is what Dragon does to an admiral in a casual extraction, what happens when he actually decides to wage war on the world government? Let's dive into that next. Garp's breaking point: father, grandfather, and marine hero. And while everyone is still trying to process Akainu getting lawn darted into the horizon, one man on that platform stops breathing for a second. Garp. In the original timeline, you remember what happens. Ace breaks free, protects Luffy, takes that magma punch, and Garp freezes. The hero of the Marines, the man who once cornered Roger, is held down by Sengoku as his grandson dies in front of him. Duty wins. My family loses. Marineford is stained by his silence. But what if the strongest man alive is his son, and that son just tore Marineford open to save Ace and Luffy in broad daylight? In this timeline, Garp doesn't just see a revolutionary, he sees the kid he trained, the boy who inherited his will in a completely different direction. You see, this is the man who raised Luffy, who laughed with Ace, who once chased Roger across the seas, now watching his own blood openly defy the entire world government at a level even Whitebeard couldn't reach. That's not just an enemy of justice, that's every compromise of the last 40 years punching him in the face at once. Here's the kicker. Instead of being paralyzed, Garp moves first. As the admirals and vice admirals regroup, as the Marines instinctively try to dogpile Dragon, our Garp steps off the platform, not toward Dragon with a fist raised, but between Dragon and the firing squads. His presence alone makes entire lines of soldiers hesitate. He barks one order, voiced like a cannon: "Stand down!" And for a heartbeat, the entire battlefield listens. Sengoku doesn't. He can't. He shouts across the chaos, demanding Garp help subdue Dragon to prove his loyalty, to end this before the world government symbol is shattered. In the original timeline, Sengoku pins Garp to stop him. But in this timeline, it's Garp who refuses to move. Shoulders squared, jaw clenched, eyes never leaving Dragon. Pattern interrupt. Garp doesn't explode, doesn't give a long speech. He just says one quiet line that cuts through the noise. You knew this day would come. Because once Luffy crashed Marineford, once Ace was on that platform, once Dragon was the strongest force in the world, this collision was inevitable. Sengoku knows it. Garp knows it. And Dragon, staring up at his father shielding his flank, definitely knows it. So what does Garp actually do? He doesn't punch Sengoku. He doesn't deck an admiral. He weaponizes his legend. Every second he stands there, the Marines behind him are less willing to fire, less willing to rush Dragon, less willing to be the ones who shoot past the hero of the Marines at his own son and grandsons. Ladies and gentlemen, that tiny shift is monstrous, because now Garp is not just passively failing to act, he is actively buying Dragon space. Even if he never throws a punch for the revolution, the world will remember that at Marineford, the hero stood in front of the cannons, not behind them. And the consequences? They're brutal. The brass can't spin this as confusion. The rank and file just watched their symbol of justice hesitate for pirates and a revolutionary. Morale fractures. Whispers start. Is Garp defecting? Is justice a lie? What if the real enemy isn't out at sea, but sitting in Maria Joie? From this moment on, every newspaper headline about Dragon's rampage will have Garp's name attached. Every kingdom hears that the hero didn't stop the world's most wanted man. He protected him. Even if the Marines don't execute Garp, his authority is changed forever. He becomes a walking question mark inside their own ranks. And for Luffy and Ace, knowing that Grandpa chose them, even in this twisted way, reshapes their resolve heading into the new world. But Dragon and Garp, standing on the same side of the battlefield, nay, even for a few minutes, does something even more dangerous. It gives the revolution a face inside the Marines themselves. So how does the world government answer that kind of betrayal from its greatest hero? Let's dive into the fallout next. Ace's fate reforged. Can the strongest man save the Fire Fist? And the fallout hits instantly, because before the world government can even process Garp's betrayal, Marineford's sky goes dark again. The wind stops, then roars. You see, this is where the original story breaks in half. In the original timeline, Ace is freed, Akainu taunts Whitebeard, Ace turns back, and that magma fist punches straight through his chest. A chain of pride, provocation, and tragedy. But what if the strongest man in the world is already on the field when that chain starts? Akainu opens his mouth to spit on Whitebeard's name. The insult hangs in the air. Ace's shoulders tense, that same rage boiling over. He takes one step back toward the Admiral, and the ground simply isn't there anymore. A vertical tornado of compressed wind erupts between them, carving a canyon through the plaza. Akainu's magma fist slams into an invisible wall and hisses out, the heat sheared away by pressure alone. Ace and Luffy are blown backward, but instead of falling into chaos, they land in something terrifyingly controlled. Dragon's moving safe zone. This is where Dragon's priorities as the strongest and as a strategist collide. He's not just saving a random pirate. He's looking at the psychological nuke that Ace's death would drop on Luffy, and the symbol it would create for the world. The son of the Pirate King died on the execution stand anyway. That's a narrative the world government would weaponize forever. In this timeline, Dragon refuses to let that story exist. So he weaponizes the wind. Bullets curve away from them like they hit an invisible dome. Cannonballs scream in only to be caught, spun, and flung back into marine ships. Kizaru fires a laser, and the beam literally bends, refracted by layers of compressed air until it detonates harmlessly in the sky. Everyone is staring at a walking no-fly zone, but Ace is still Ace, stubborn, bleeding, ready to throw his life away for a captain who's already dying. He screams at Dragon to let him go, to let him fight. And Dragon finally turns, really looks at him, and drops the nuke. Portgas D, Ace, or should I say Gall D Ace, are you going to throw away Roger's will and Luffy's future just to answer one Marine's insult? He doesn't shout. The words just cut. He invokes Garp too. Your grandfather is out there tearing his own justice apart for you two. Don't make his choice meaningless. Then he simply grabs Ace by the collar, pinning him with one hand while the other hand guides the storm. Here's the kicker. Ace isn't out-muscled. He's out-prioritized. Dragon forces him to retreat not with fists, but with the one thing Ace can't ignore, Luffy's dream. And as the three of them ride that howling corridor of wind out of Marineford, everyone watches two sons of legends vanish under the protection of the strongest revolutionary alive. Yeah, but if Ace lives and walks away from Marineford beside Luffy and Dragon, what does that do to the balance of power in the new world? And who dares move against that family next? Sengoku's nightmare. When history's secrets walk onto the battlefield, the wind closes behind them like a curtain. But for Sengoku, that gust isn't an escape route. It's a declaration of war from history itself. You see, while everyone else is just freaking out that Dragon snatched Ace and Luffy from under the Admiral's noses, Sengoku is seeing something completely different. In the original timeline, Dragon is a distant threat, a name on a wanted poster. But in this timeline, the strongest man in the world just walked into Marineford, flexed on 3 admirals at once, and left with the 2 most dangerous D-bearers alive. And Sengoku is one of the only people here who knows what that actually means. He's been briefed in those silent chambers of Marie Joieuse. He's seen the erased symbols, the forbidden names, the records of an ancient kingdom that dared to unite the world under a different banner. He knows about the will of D, about the one who sits on the empty throne. And he knows that the world government doesn't fear power alone. They fear power plus knowledge. Dragon has both. So Sengoku doesn't just shout for pursuit. His first order is information suppression, Dendenmushi snipers, instantly. We're talking precise orders. Any visual feed on Dragon is to be cut. Destroy the transponders if you have to. Marines on the walls suddenly turn their rifles not on pirates, but on cameras. Shells hit broadcast towers instead of ships. And the whole world is watching Marineford. And Sengoku is trying to make sure they don't understand what they just saw. At the same time, he's pulling key intel officers back from the front. Cypherpol agents, code specialists, anyone who knows the word void in the wrong context gets ordered to retreat behind the inner lines. and over a secure line, he's already calling the Gorosei. You can almost hear the ice in his voice. He's moved. He's finally stepped into the light. Here's the kicker. Sengoku has to decide the shape of justice in real time. Does he throw all 3 admirals after Dragon, turn Marineford into a crater, and risk losing the headquarters, the symbol of Marine Order, on live broadcast? Or does he cut his losses, let Ace and Luffy go? And focus on preserving the image of an unshakable navy, even as the real balance of the world just changed above their heads. But what if those old briefings were even worse than we thought? Sengoku's been told that Dragon's lineage, his D blood, and his knowledge of the ancient kingdom make him uniquely capable of reviving that forgotten alliance. Now add this twist: the strongest fighter alive, with the charisma to unite kingdoms and the power to crush a Yonko crew solo. That's not a criminal. That's a restart button for the Void Century. So Sengoku makes a chilling call. He orders a controlled withdrawal of non-essential forces, framing it as reorganization, while quietly authorizing something he would never have unleashed for Whitebeard alone: a proto-buster call signal to Mary Juwais. I'm not on Marineford, but ready to fire on any island Dragon's wind touches next. Because if Dragon is allowed to stand in the open as the strongest man in the world, the final war might start years ahead of schedule, and the world government has weapons even the Yonko have never seen. Whitebeard's last stand. Rewritten. Ally, rival, or obstacle. And right when the world government reaches for weapons, even the Yonko have never seen. We cut back to the old king of the seas. Whitebeard. In the original timeline, he was the lone mountain at Marineford, the final wall between Ace and the execution platform. But what if Whitebeard is standing there, bleeding, shaking, and suddenly realizes the strongest force on this battlefield isn't him anymore? It's the man ripping the sky open with a single breath. Monkey D. Dragon. You see, this hits Whitebeard on a different level. He's not just watching another pirate emperor. He's seeing a new kind of monster. Not a man chasing territory or treasure, but someone who wants to crack the entire system in half. This isn't Rocks. This isn't Roger. This is the storm that comes after the pirate era. So when Dragon's winds cleave through Akainu's magma and the plaza goes silent, Whitebeard doesn't roar in jealousy. He laughs. Low. Rough. You chose a different path than Roger, boy. One line that tells you everything. They've spoken before, argued about the future of the world, and now the answer is playing out over Marineford. Dragon glances back, cloak snapping in the gale. Your era opened the sea. Mine will close the cage. No speeches, no alliance contract. On just mutual recognition between titans who both heard the drums of the coming storm in their own way. Here's the kicker. That one exchange completely changes Whitebeard's strategy. In the original timeline, he tries to hold the line himself, tanking admiral hits so his sons can push forward. In this timeline, Whitebeard instantly recalculates. Why fight the whole war when the man who can fight the world is already here? He stops trying to be the shield and becomes the trigger. Every quake from his Bicento isn't about clashing with Sengoku or Akainu anymore. It's about reshaping the battlefield so his sons can escape while Dragon handles the macro threat. Whitebeard trusts Dragon with something he never trusted any Yonko with: the future. So his final attack is no longer a solitary, stubborn charge. Let's dive into the last stand reimagined. Whitebeard slams his fist into the air, shattering the very foundation of Marineford, while Dragon times a concentrated storm front with surgical precision. Quakes rip the island apart, and razor wind tunnels slam into the fractures, turning them into a cataclysmic barrier. The result? Marineford literally splits open, a man-made Grand Line trench raging with wind, debris, and seawater, carving a path that separates the Whitebeard pirates from the Marine headquarters. Admirals can't easily cross. Battleships can't instantly reposition. Akainu is forced to choose between chasing Luffy and Ace, or being blown into the abyss. Whitebeard stands at the edge of that new canyon, body full of holes, half his face gone, but his smile is different. He's not the last pillar holding back the world anymore. He's the bridge between eras. He dies knowing the torch isn't just with Luffy sprinting away. It's with a dragon-led revolution that finally has the raw power to finish what Roger started. And if Dragon is allowed to walk away from Marineford like that, What happens when the other Yonko realize the strongest man alive isn't a pirate at all? Admirals in retreat, when justice meets an unwinnable fight. The Yonko feel that shift in the air, but the first ones to truly understand it are the admirals standing right in front of Dragon. Akainu doesn't hesitate. He rockets forward, magma arm roaring, while Kizaru flashes into the sky and Aokiji spreads ice across the bay. In the original timeline, these three were Marineford's final trump card, the living proof of Marine supremacy. But what if, in this timeline, you watch all three unleash everything, and it still isn't enough? Magma rains down like a meteor shower. Light spears stab from every angle. Frozen spikes surge up from the sea. It's a 3-on-1 execution, and Dragon doesn't dodge. He exhales. Air pressure snaps. Kizaru's lasers bend, curving around Dragon like warped rainbows, refracted by invisible walls of compressed wind. Aokiji's ice flowers into massive glacial spears, then shatters mid-formation, turning into glittering snow before it ever reaches him. Akainu's magma fist slams into a spiraling vortex and instantly cools, exploding into black obsidian shards that get caught in Dragon's storm. You see this halo of spinning glass, a cyclone of razor-sharp obsidian surrounding him, every shard hanging exactly where he wants it. And the whole battlefield just stops. Even Whitebeard's men stare. This isn't just a Logia. This is someone rewriting the rules of the environment itself. Aokiji feels it first. He's fought Whitebeard, he's clashed with Sakazuki, he knows what a losing battlefield looks like. Every time he tries to freeze the bay, Dragon thins the air, stealing the medium Kuzan needs to spread his cold. He's calculating in real time. If they keep pushing, those obsidian knives are going to rip through vice admirals, pacifistas, even the execution platform. How many Marines die just because Sakazuki refuses to back down? Kizaru hangs in the air, light body flickering. Is this really worth it? He mutters, half to himself. He can move fast, but when the air itself is a cage, speed just means slamming into another invisible wall. Every redirected beam risks hitting their own fleet. For the first time, the laziest admiral is questioning the mission, not the effort. Akainu, though, he roars and charges again. Justice doesn't retreat, but Dragon's wind crushes his magma into solid rock mid-punch, twisting Sakazuki's arm off-angle and driving him into the ground like a meteor. The shockwave sends Marines flying while Dragon barely shifts his stance. Sakazuki isn't just outmatched, he's isolated, the symbol of absolute justice being physically pinned down by a man the world government calls a criminal. And that's when Sengoku has to make the ugliest call of his career. Snails are broadcasting to the entire world. The Yonko are watching, the Gorosei are listening. But Sengoku's teeth grind as he sees the platform tremble under Dragon's winds and Whitebeard's fading quakes. One more all-out clash, and Ace, Luffy, and the symbol of marine authority all vanish in the same blast. Admirals, fall back, prioritize the platform, defend the assets. In an instant, the whole tempo of Marineford changes. Those three unstoppable monsters you saw walking through pirates like ants? They're suddenly on the defensive, forming walls of ice and light, just to keep Dragon's storm from ripping the execution stand apart. The Marines aren't hunting pirates anymore. They're surviving a natural disaster with a will. Here's the kicker. In the original timeline, Marineford became the day the world learned to fear the admirals and the Yonko equally. In this timeline, it becomes the day everyone realizes even three admirals together can't decisively bring down the strongest man alive. So what happens to the world government's aura of invincibility? When the cameras catch Dragon looking up, past Marineford, toward Mariajoie itself? Luffy's role in a world where Dad is the apex predator. Luffy's entire role at Marineford flips the moment that gaze toward Mariajoie belongs to his dad. Not Whitebeard, not Shanks, but Dragon, the apex predator of this world. In the original timeline, Luffy is pure chaos. He sprints through Marineford reckless and overmatched, getting saved on repeat. Mihawk swings, Vista and the commanders cover. Kizaru lasers him, Ivankov and the newcomer step in. Even getting to the scaffold only works because everyone else keeps throwing their bodies between Luffy and certain death. And when Ace dies, Luffy just breaks. Mind, body, spirit. But what if, in this timeline, the strongest man alive is his father. And that father actually intervenes? Suddenly, when Akainu lunges for Luffy after Ace's sacrifice moment is supposed to happen, a single pressure of wind knocks the magma fist sideways. The battlefield goes quiet. Everyone feels it. That same stormy presence from Logue Town. But now it's not a hint. It's a declaration. Dragon descends, not as a rumor, but as a force that even 3 admirals hesitate to challenge. Here's the kicker. Luffy's first reaction isn't joy. It's fury. You see, this is the guy who shouted at Rayleigh that he wants to be Pirate King on his own terms. And so when Dragon blocks an admiral for him, Luffy screams, "Stay out of this!" even as his hands shake from the shockwave of his father's haki. Confusion, anger, relief, awe, all crashing together. He hates that he needs help. He loves that Ace might live because of it. How do you rebel against the man who just saved your brother and casually stalemated Akainu, Aokiji, and Kizaru in the same breath? But Dragon doesn't coddle him. That's the crucial change. Instead of scooping Luffy up and ending the war, he weaponizes his overwhelming power to create openings. Wind walls redirect Kizaru's light. Cracking air pressure stalls Sengoku's Buddha shockwaves. Yet every critical decision, Dragon throws it back at Luffy. Who do you save first? Ace? Or Jinbe, who's about to die for you? Do you keep pushing toward the scaffold, or retreat and live to fight the world government another day? Marineford becomes Luffy's first real command test under God-tier protection. Dragon is the safety net, but he refuses to be the puppeteer. Luffy still has to choose to run when Whitebeard orders the retreat, still has to decide to trust Crocodile, still has to scream for everyone to fall back while Dragon holds the line. Now, does Dragon being the strongest break Luffy's journey? On paper, it sounds like it. Why fear Kaido if Dad solos a Yonko crew? Why hype Imu if Dragon can challenge the Shadow King directly? But this actually raises the bar. In the original timeline, Luffy is chasing legends like Roger and Whitebeard. In this timeline, he's also chasing his own bloodline. But the man who can shake Mariajoie with a storm is the new ceiling. And that plants a dangerous seed. As Luffy watches Dragon dominate Marineford, watching the world's most wanted man turn the admirals into background noise, he doesn't just think, "I'll become Pirate King." He silently adds a second vow. One day, he'll stand on equal footing with that man. Not under his banner, not protected in his shadow. Side by side. So when the war ends and the era shifts, the question hanging over everything isn't just, can Luffy topple the world government? It's, can he rise high enough that even Dragon has to look him in the eye as an equal? The escape that shouldn't be possible. Extracting Ace and Luffy. But what if that silent vow from Luffy comes under fire instantly? Because Marineford isn't done yet. If the execution platform is shattered, Ace is breathing, Luffy's barely conscious, and the Marines are not letting their 2 biggest future threats just walk away. In the original timeline, this is where Chaos, Sacrifice, and Shanks finally slam the brakes on the war. But in this timeline, the pattern interrupt is Dragon deciding, no, I'm ending this myself. And the way he does it looks like the world's first natural disaster with a will. The sky goes black. Not from clouds, but from wind compressed so tightly it looks solid. You see, Dragon doesn't just summon a storm, he carves it. A corridor of howling air tears straight through Marineford, walls of compressed wind forming a tunnel where bullets, magma fists, and laser beams slam in and ricochet away. Outside that path, the sea goes insane. You whipped into a spiraling maelstrom that shatters ships and drags entire war vessels sideways. No Marine can safely sail into this. Inside the corridor, it's deathly calm. That's when Ivankov and Inazuma burst from the debris, faces lit up with that wild revolutionary grin. In the original timeline, they were already miracles for getting Luffy this far. But here, they're part of a coordinated extraction. Inazuma is slicing fallen buildings into ramps and barricades. Ivankov is hormone-boosting anyone still able to move. And suddenly, Sabo drops in from the sky, pipe in hand, slamming a vice admiral into the ground like it's nothing. Whitebeard's remaining commanders see it instantly. This is the exit, so they form a literal human shield along the edges of Dragon's storm corridor. Yozu, Vista, Marco, and even the most battered division commanders plant their feet and say with their bodies, "No one gets through." It's the last act of respect to the man who just died for Ace. The Marines snap. Pacifistas start firing blindly into the storm, beams bending off the compressed wind and exploding harmlessly into the churning sea. Vice admirals launch themselves forward, bodies shredded by razor gusts as they try to close the gap. And here's the kicker. Garp himself is clotheslining Marines, knocking them flat when they push too far, snarling that anyone who enters that corridor dies. Then we get the visual that breaks the world. Dragon walks. Ace on one side, Luffy on the other. He steps through a battlefield where bullets literally freeze mid-air around him, hanging like a metal rain that lost its nerve. Explosions curve away at the last second. Akainu's magma fist stretches forward, and the wind shears it apart before it reaches them. Even the admirals hesitate, eyes narrowed, because crossing that path doesn't feel like justice. It feels like suicide. Sengoku reads it faster than anyone. If they keep pressing, Dragon will stop holding back. Marineford, their symbol of justice, will be erased from the map in one storm. So instead of Shanks walking in to negotiate, it's Sengoku, veins bulging, screaming the order to stand down while Dragon's maelstrom slowly unwinds. The war ends not with a treaty, but with a question. What happens to the world when the strongest man alive just stole Ace and Luffy from the jaws of justice and walked away untouched? And let's dive into how that single walk out of Marineford reshapes every power balance on the sea. Aftermath shockwaves, a world that watched Dragon win. The world doesn't breathe. Marineford's sky clears, the maelstrom fades, and yet the real storm is only just beginning. Because even with Denden Mushi crushed under Sengoku's heel, enough of Dragon's rampage leaks through that the entire planet sees something they were never meant to see. A man walking through 3 admirals. In the original timeline, the broadcast cuts mostly on Whitebeard's final stand. In this timeline, it lingers just long enough on Dragon. You see Akainu's magma fist stopped by invisible pressure. You see Kizaru's light shattered by a black and green hockey cyclone. You see Aokiji frozen mid-attack, ice whipped away by a roaring storm. Then the feed dies, unstatic. Silence. And that's where the rumors are born. Across Sabayoti and Water 7, in back alley bars of the New World, people replay those final frames over and over. The Storm Man, the true king of the sea, the demon who defied 3 admirals. Did he really crack the sky like Whitebeard? Did he really walk into Marineford, take Ace and Luffy, and walk out untouched? No one knows the full truth, so the legend instantly grows bigger than the footage. Now jump to the Yonko. Big Mom in Totoland hears the reports and her sweet smile hardens. A monster that can erase an entire marine war with weather alone? That threatens her entire candy-coated empire. Kaido, who calls himself the strongest creature, stares at the newspaper, veins bulging. And for the first time, the question hits him. Is he actually number 1 in this world? Or has he been living under Dragon's sky the whole time? Shanks reads the headline and just exhales. Relief that Luffy's alive, but also that chill, that, oh, this escalated way too fast feeling. If Dragon is this strong, does Shanks still get to be the balancing force, or has the board been flipped entirely? And Blackbeard, ladies and gentlemen, is doing the fastest mental math in the New World. In the original timeline, he rises in the vacuum Whitebeard leaves behind. But what if the vacuum is now filled by a revolutionary who can solo Marineford? His entire timeline of snatching power suddenly looks way more dangerous. Meanwhile, the common people are losing their minds. In slave pens under the celestial dragons, in rebel cells across the Goa kingdom, in tiny villages that heard whispers of a revolutionary army, but never saw proof. Now they have a face, not just a symbol. A one-man army who walked into the holiest fortress of justice and tore 2 condemned men out of an execution. If Dragon can do that for his son and for Ace, what can he do for them? Inside the Marines, it's chaos. Rank-and-file soldiers who watched their admirals get blown back are asking the question no one wants to say out loud. Can justice stand against a man like that? Some clench their fists, vowing to train, to master hockey, to reach admiral level just to not feel that helpless ever again. Others stare at the sea, broken, quietly wondering if the world government really is the side of righteousness when it fears one man this much. And a dangerous few? What, they start to sympathize. If Dragon's that strong, maybe his justice is the right one. Here's the kicker. Marineford was supposed to be the day the great pirate era started to end. Instead, it becomes day one of the Age of Revolution. The world didn't just watch a war. It watched the strongest man alive declare war by action, not by words. So what happens when that storm doesn't pass? And Dragon decides Marineford was only his opening move. Revolutionary Army 2.0. How a strongest tier dragon reshapes his own forces. If Marineford is day one of the Age of Revolution, then Dragon's next move decides what that age actually looks like. Is this a shadow war with a monster in the background, or a full-blown crusade led by the strongest man in the world standing at the front lines? In the original timeline, the Revolutionary Army played it slow and surgical. Covert cells, anonymous saboteurs, kingdom by kingdom subversion, they toppled regimes like Drum and other unnamed nations by turning the people against their rulers, always making sure the world government never had a clean shot at Dragon himself. No Marineford, no open clash with admirals, just whispers, underground networks, and quiet victories that didn't shake the Yonko system outright. But in this timeline, Marineford shatters that ceiling. Everyone just watched Dragon walk through Akainu's magma, parry Kizaru's light, and split the skies with a single gust. Suddenly, the revolution doesn't just have a name, it has a living, natural disaster. And you see the shift instantly. Buster calls that once terrified islands now hesitate the moment a Den Mushi crackles with the word dragon. What Navy Fleet commander wants to be the one on record for calling down the strongest man alive? Here's the kicker, that one battle lets the Revolutionary Army restructure overnight. Sabo, Ivankov, Karasu, Morley, these aren't just scattered commanders anymore, they're generals planning around a walking trump card. Operations that used to be designed to avoid admirals now assume Dragon can personally neutralize at least one top-tier threat. So instead of quietly undermining some random king, they start targeting celestial dragon-backed regimes, slave hubs, and weapon factories head-on. Picture Sabo leading an assault on a Holy Land supply port, knowing that if Kizaru shows up, where Dragon's wind can literally blow the battlefield into a new formation. Recruitment goes insane. Word of mouth spreads faster than any newspaper. The man who humiliated Marineford is the same guy who's been freeing countries in the shadows for years. Oppressed citizens who once thought rebellion was suicide suddenly believe they're on the winning side. Even disillusioned Marines, those who watched Akainu get folded or saw the Gorosei panic, start defecting. What if a vice admiral who followed Garp now follows Dragon? What if Cypher Paul agents secretly feed intel because they think this is the only way to end the Celestial Dragon's rule? But what if that strength becomes a double-edged sword? The more the world centers the revolution around Dragon, the more fragile the movement gets if he ever falls. Dragon knows this. So he walks a razor's edge, appearing at key flashpoints like Marineford or a Reverie-adjacent incident, then vanishing and forcing local commanders to finish the job. He wants the symbol, not the cult. Because if the Age of Revolution rests on one storm, what happens when the wind stops blowing? Or when an even darker power finally steps onto the stage? Yonko on notice, redrawing the map of the new world. So what happens when the storm everyone's been whispering about becomes the eye of the entire world? When Dragon isn't just dangerous, but the confirmed strongest existence above Kaido, Shanks, and even the monsters hiding in Mariéjois? In the original timeline, the Yonko balance is a three-way tension: pirates, marines, and a shadowy revolutionary threat in the background. But in this timeline, whereas the moment Dragon's power is revealed on a Marineford or Reverie scale stage, the new world doesn't just shake, it redraws itself overnight. Kaido hears the news first the only way he understands. Raw feats, a single gust of wind stopping an admiral's magma fist, a Holy Land barrier shattered by invisible pressure. You see, this is the guy who wanted to crash Marineford for a glorious death. Now, he has a target. Kaido starts hunting Dragon like he once hunted Odin and the Rock's remnants, sailing toward any island where revolutionary banners rise, just for the chance that Dragon will appear and finally give him that strongest in the world send-off. Big Mom reacts completely differently. She doesn't want to beat Dragon. She wants to own him. Or at least, own his legacy. Suddenly, her obsession with bloodlines goes into overdrive. What if she can marry one of her daughters to Sabo, to Koala, to any confirmed high-tier revolutionary? What if she can snatch some wind god lineage for her family the way she tried with Sanji and the Germa? Whole Cake's tea parties quietly shift into political traps aimed at baiting revolutionary envoys. Meanwhile, Blackbeard smiles the widest. Here's the kicker. Teach never wants to fight the strongest head-on. He wants to loot the aftermath. So he steers his crew toward fault lines between Dragon and the world government. A liberated kingdom that just kicked out a celestial dragon? Perfect place to swoop in, steal a devil fruit from a fallen admiral, and blame it on revolutionary chaos. Every dragon versus government clash becomes a buffet for Teach's schemes. Shanks, though, is the real wild card. In the original timeline, he walks into Marineford to stop the war and preserve balance. But what if the strongest force is his old comrade's father? As the man who keeps the seas from exploding, Shanks might sail straight to Dragon for a quiet, off-screen meeting. Does he try to mediate between Dragon and the Gorosei to avoid total collapse? Or does he, ladies and gentlemen, lend subtle support, red-haired intel, hockey secrets, while still defending the freedom of pirates who don't want a new justice ruling the waves? Territories start flipping. Islands under Yonko protection suddenly see revolutionary cells offering real liberation instead of tribute. Some pirate crews defect, inspired by Dragon's overwhelming presence. Others dig in, refusing to trade one overlord for another. On a Dragon versus Kaido showdown over a country like Wano or Dressrosa turns from pirate drama into a revolutionary flashpoint, while Dragon intercepting Blackbeard mid-devil fruit heist turns Teach's usual third-party ambush into a direct ideological clash. The old three-way standoff is dead. The Marines, Yonko, and Warlords are no longer equal corners of a triangle. Everything now orbits one gravitational center, Monkey D. Dragon. Every emperor, every admiral, every warlord has to answer a simple question. Are you with the storm, against it, or trying to ride its edge without getting torn apart? And caught right between all of that is Luffy. Because if Dragon becomes the strongest symbol in the world, how does the future Pirate King carve out his own legend without sailing in his father's shadow? Or the reverie that turned into a coup? Dragon crashes the Holy Land, so how do you prove that Storm isn't just a symbol, but the single scariest reality in the world? You drag it straight into the place that was never supposed to feel wind at all. The Holy Land. The reverie convenes just like in the original timeline. Kings and queens from every corner of the seas ride up the red line. Cobra, Riku, Dalton, Neptune, all of them stepping into that pristine, untouchable city. Celestial dragons parade through marriage ways, slaves in chains, guards in gleaming armor, everyone pretending this is the peak of civilization. But what if, this time, the storm doesn't wait outside the gates? In the shadows, the revolutionary commanders are already moving. Sabo, Karasu, Morley, Lindbergh, just like Cannon, infiltrate the underground routes. I map out the slave pens and mark the Tenryubito targets. In the original timeline, Dragon hangs back, letting his people handle the covert op. But in this timeline, Marineford changed everything. Ace was nearly executed, Luffy was nearly erased, and Dragon saw exactly how far the world government is willing to go when its narrative is threatened. Here's the kicker. After Marineford, the government doesn't relax. They tighten the leash. New bounties, new SSG experiments, quiet plans to clean up dangerous bloodlines, Garp's family included. So Dragon looks at the reverie and doesn't see a diplomatic summit. He sees the world's biggest propaganda stage, the place where kings are bullied into obedience, and history is rewritten with a smile for the cameras. If you want to shatter the illusion, you attack the theater itself. And the inciting incident hits like a slap across the whole timeline. A celestial dragon publicly humiliates a visiting royal who spoke up about slavery. Think Cobra or King Riku. Or even worse, orders the instant execution of a known revolutionary sympathizer dragged out in chains. The crowd freezes. The royals look away. Admirals and CP agents close in. And Dragon just decides he's done watching. Clouds above the red line suddenly twist. The air goes thin. A wind pressure no one can explain presses down on Mary Joyce. Then he walks in. Monkey D. Dragon steps through the immaculate streets like he owns the weather itself. Each footfall, the air buckles. Gravity-defying storms spiral over the Holy Land, rain climbing upward, lightning striking sideways. Guards rush him and are crushed to their knees by sheer air pressure. Unable to breathe, Haki shredded by something far beyond a normal Logia. The bubble architecture around the celestial dragons ripples, stretches, and starts to crack as the atmosphere itself rebels. Everyone feels it. Kings on their knees, celestial dragons screaming, admirals hesitating. This isn't a pirate raid, this is a coup. The camera of the story swings up to Pangaea Castle. The gates tremble, not from an attack, but from Dragon's presence alone pressing against the entire structure. Inside, the Gorosei stand, and somewhere deeper, Imu watches as the strongest man alive walks straight toward the empty throne. And the terrifying question hanging in the air? If Dragon is willing to invade the god's backyard in broad daylight, what exactly is he planning to do once those doors finally open? Or Dragon versus Gorosei, when politics meets absolute power. Those doors don't just open, they're ripped inward. The air itself rebels. Inside Pangaea Castle's throne room, the empty throne looms. And for the first time in centuries, the so-called gods have to stand up. You see, in the original timeline, the Gorosei stay in the shadows, just talking, plotting, moving pawns. But what if the strongest man in the world walks straight into their sanctum and forces them to be pieces on the board themselves? In this timeline, the five elders don't look like fragile old men anymore. Robes peel back, sandals scrape stone. You see a sword that hums with conqueror's haki, an arm that blackens with advanced armament, a cane that suddenly crackles with the faint glow of a devil fruit, and one of them casually mentions Pluton's true firing range, like it's common trivia. Another murmurs the name of a kingdom erased in the Void Century, just to see Dragon's eyes narrow. And above them? Hidden in the shadows of the garden ceiling, Imu watches through a curtain of ivy and darkness, testing whether the most wanted man in the world can really threaten a god. Dragon doesn't waste words. Wind swirls at his back like a living cloak, the air pressure so intense that the celestial dragon symbol carved into the marble actually begins to crack. He calls them out instantly. 800 years of lies, the erased history, Ohara, Luffy's bounty being manipulated, the way they brand pirates as monsters while celestial dragons buy and sell human lives. How many kingdoms did they crush just to keep 1 century of truth buried? Or the Gorosei fire back with politics. They call him an extremist. They say Ace and Luffy at Marineford were necessary sacrifices to keep the world from plunging into chaos. They claim that without their justice, Kaido, Big Mom, and Blackbeard would have already burned the seas. But what if, ladies and gentlemen, the real chaos is the system they built? Here's the kicker. This argument doesn't stay verbal for long. A Gorosei swings that cursed blade, and the entire garden splits, trees sheared clean in half. Another elder stomps down, and gravity spikes, cracking tiles under Dragon's feet. For anyone else, that's a death sentence. Dragon just smiles. The air crushes back. Roses explode into a horizontal storm. Petals turned into razor blades by slicing wind. Clouds form under the ceiling, and a localized storm detonates point blank. It's rain turning to needles, lightning dancing along Dragon's outstretched arm. He doesn't need Marineford. He turns the Holy Land itself into his battlefield. Individually, the Gorosei are monsters. Together, they're a nightmare. But in an open space, Dragon is the environment. Every breath is his weapon. Every gust is a counter. Suddenly, they're forced to reveal trump cards they never wanted anyone to see. A time-warping glance, a shadow that moves without its owner, a seal that momentarily suppresses devil fruits. Pattern interrupt, because Dragon never came here to win a brawl. With one focused cyclone, he shatters the celestial dragon symbol above the throne, the emblem of their divine right, raining down in chunks. Another blast tears open the side of the castle, and from a lower level, a massive steel pod is ripped skyward, Kuma's prison, chains snapping like twigs as Dragon's wind cradles his broken comrade. He declares it right there, voice booming over the storm. The age of quiet revolutions is over. This is open war. Before Imu can step out, Before the Gorosei can fully unleash whatever final horror they've been hiding since the Void Century, Dragon rides a spiraling column of wind out of Pangaea, Kuma in tow, leaving a ruined throne room and a shattered symbol behind. So now the balance of the world is broken. The gods are exposed as fighters, and the strongest man alive just slapped them in their own house and walked away. The question is, how does a world built on fear react when fear itself stops working? Imu's countermove, the Hidden King responds to the strongest rebel. And that's the moment. It's right there, where the camera cuts away from the cheering revolutionaries and drops us into the darkest room in the world. You see, in the original timeline, Imu stays pure mystery. A silhouette on the empty throne, a pair of eyes staring at Luffy's wanted poster. But what if the strongest dragon just walked into their house, beat their gods, and walked out? In this timeline, the Shadow King is forced to actually feel something they haven't felt since the Void Century. Pressure. Imu has watched eras rise and fall like waves. Rocks, Roger, Whitebeard, even Kaido and Shanks are just loud ripples on the surface. But Dragon? This is different. This is a man with the will of D, direct knowledge of the true history through Kuma and the scholars he saved, and combat power that just clowned the Gorosei in their own sanctum. For Imu, that's not a rebel. That's a mirror of the enemy they erased 800 years ago. So what tools does a living fossil like that reach for when fear stops working? Let's dive into the arsenal. First, the ancient weapons. In the original timeline, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus are distant, looming threats. In this timeline, Imu can't afford to wait. We're talking accelerated excavation of Pluton in Wano, direct contact with whoever controls Uranus, and a hard move to either capture or eliminate Shirahoshi before Dragon can reach her. On top of that, Imu tightens the leash on CP0 and drags out units the Marines don't even know exist. If Lucci and the Seraphim were the tip of the spear, now we see the hidden blade, God's Knights operating under Imu's personal orders, Black Ops admirals scrubbed from history. His assassination team sent not for Dragon himself, but for his backbone. Sabo, Ivankov, Belo Betty, the commanders who actually run the revolutionary fronts? One by one, they become targets for accidents, buster calls, and quiet disappearances. Here's the kicker. Imu doesn't just fight Dragon directly, they weaponize his heart. What happens when the world government realizes Luffy and the legacy of Ace are Dragon's emotional weak points? Suddenly, bounties skyrocket, traps are set in the new world, and every Yonko conflict is subtly nudged to push Luffy into fatal situations. Imu doesn't need to kill Dragon in battle if they can force him to choose between saving his son and saving the world. And then, we hit the real nightmare, the Dragon contingency. Onto what if the world government always had a plan for the second coming of their ancient enemy? A protocol where, if a D with world-ending power rises again, they're willing to sacrifice entire regions, flood red line segments, or trigger global weather catastrophes with Uranus, and blame Dragon. In this timeline, whole blues can be written off as revolutionary terrorism to turn the masses against him. So Imu makes the call. No more subtle strings, no more quiet erasures. If Dragon is stepping into the light as the strongest man alive, then the world government will meet him with open, apocalyptic force. The Age of Whispers ends, and the Age of world-scale ultimates begins. But if Imu goes all in like that, how does the rest of the world respond when the sky itself becomes a battlefield? Ace and Sabo, two flames under the strongest storm. When the sky becomes a battlefield, you know whose name comes next. Monkey D. Dragon. And if the strongest man alive is the one pulling the storm, what happens to the three little flames he left behind on Dawn Island? In the original timeline, Luffy, Ace, and Sabo were just three kids with a shared dream and a shared cup of sake, a pirate, and a noble runaway. But what if that brother trio is reframed under a world where Dragon openly flexes as the apex power? In this timeline, you suddenly have Luffy, the future Pirate King, Ace, the son of the Pirate King, and Sabo, the revolutionary chief of staff. Each one directly mentored, saved, or influenced by the strongest man on the planet. Ace surviving Marineford because Dragon personally ripped the execution stand out of the battlefield changes everything. He doesn't just owe Luffy and Whitebeard anymore. He owes Dragon his life. You see, that creates a different kind of scar than the one Akainu gave him. Post-Marineford, Ace is not partying on some random island. He's staring at his Vivre card, at Whitebeard's grave, and at the newspaper calling Dragon the storm that defied the world government on the world stage. Does Ace go back under Whitebeard's flag, clinging to the idea of family the way he did before? Or does he feel a new weight, a new debt, pulling him toward the revolutionary army that just risked everything for him? Here's the kicker. With Dragon this strong, the revolution isn't just a shadow movement, it's a rival world power. Ace has to ask himself, is being 2nd Division commander enough when the man who saved him is trying to burn the entire system down? Meanwhile, Sabo isn't just some amnesiac wildcard. As Dragon's right hand, he becomes the living bridge between Luffy's pirate chaos and Dragon's calculated revolution. In the original timeline, Dressrosa and Marine movements stayed mostly disconnected. But in this timeline, Sabo can quietly sink Luffy's roots with revolutionary strikes, timing a raid on a celestial dragon transport with a Straw Hat clash, or feeding Luffy intel that coincidentally topples a world government puppet king. Let's dive into their growth. Under Dragon's roof, Ace doesn't just spam fire punches. He's pushed to refine his haki, to harden his flames until they're plasma blue, to mix observation with his logia like a living wildfire radar. Sabo, in training beside him, sharpens his own haki and Mera Mera no Mi, with Dragon dissecting their weaknesses. Suddenly, this trio of brothers, Gear 5 Luffy, Blue Flame Ace, and Dragon-trained Sabo, has a combined threat level that makes an entire Yonko crew look small. But if Dragon is the strongest and the face of the revolution, and Luffy is racing toward Pirate King, where does Ace stand when the final storm hits? Does he become Dragon's sword on the front lines, Luffy's shield against Imu's apocalyptic force, or the one man whose loyalty is torn enough to stand between father and brother when their paths finally cross? And if that clash ever comes, whose flames does Sabo follow when the sky splits? The sun god or the storm? Are Luffy's training arc on hard mode surpassing the strongest father? And that question, whose storm do you follow, doesn't just haunt Sabo. It becomes the drumbeat of Luffy's entire training arc. In the original timeline, Luffy leaves Marineford shattered, trains with Rayleigh on Rusakaina, and his goal is clear. Get strong enough to protect his friends. Straightforward. Pure. But what if, in this timeline, that same kid has watched his own father casually shut down admirals, split the clouds over Marineford, and make Mary Joie tremble just by existing? Suddenly, Strong Enough has a face. A name. Monkey D. Dragon. You see, Rayleigh is still there, still the Dark King, still teaching Luffy the basics of haki, observation, armament, future sight foundations. But now there's this insane contrast. Where Rayleigh explains advanced Conqueror's coding, and Luffy just blurts out, "Is this as strong as my dad?" That hits different, right? Because even Rayleigh, the man who sailed with Roger, has to admit Dragon's haki is on a level that even he respects. Here's the kicker. That knowledge warps Luffy's motivation. He isn't just racing to save his crew anymore. He's racing a legend who shares his blood. Every memory of Marineford in this timeline is stamped with Dragon's silhouette blocking Akainu. Dragon's wind swallowing Kizaru's light. Dragon staring down Sengoku as if the fleet admiral is just another stepping stone. So Luffy trains like he's chasing a storm. Dragon, of course, isn't holding his hand. But what if he trains Luffy the way only the world's most wanted man can? Indirectly. From the shadows. Sabo shows up on Rusakaina with messages, but they're really challenges. 1 month, Luffy has to liberate an island from a warlord-level tyrant without killing anyone, forcing his haki control to skyrocket. Another month, Dragon leaks intel so pacifistas and Cypher Paul agents crash down on Luffy's training ground, turning his boot camp into a mini reverie war. Luffy isn't just punching monsters anymore, he's making revolutionary-scale decisions. Who do you save when you can't save everyone? Which flag do you burn when the whole world is watching? That pressure is exactly what pushes his haki toward Gear 5 level creativity way earlier. Rubber that ignores logic, haki that bends reality. Not because he's copying Dragon, but because he refuses to be trapped in his father's shadow. And that's the emotional core. As Luffy loves that Dragon saved Ace and saved him, but he hates the idea of being Dragon's son first and Luffy second. There's pride. There's resentment. When people whisper, he's the child of the strongest man alive, Luffy's response is simple. I'm gonna be Pirate King. I'll beat that guy too. So we set up the inevitable. After the time skip, after early Gear 5 awakenings shake the New World, Luffy throws down the gauntlet. Not to Kaido, not to Shanks, to Dragon. A future meeting, not as enemies, but as a test. Fight me seriously. When that storm finally hits, whose will splits the sky? And more importantly, who's watching from Marie Joieuse when father and son both reach for the title of Man Who Changes the World? Dressrosa and beyond, when Dragon's shadow falls on Doflamingo. So when we finally hit Dressrosa in this timeline, that promise between Luffy and Dragon is already hanging over everything like a storm cloud. In the original timeline, Dressrosa is about a warlord tyrant, a smile factory, and one country's liberation. But what if that same island suddenly became a live test case in the global war between the strongest man in the world and the people who own the world? You see, Doflamingo isn't just some flamboyant villain. He's a former celestial dragon, the underworld broker Joker, and Kaido's main plug for smiles. Every puppet string he pulls is tied straight back to Marie Joieuse. In the original timeline, that alone made him dangerous. In this timeline, where Dragon is actively hunting celestial dragon power structures, Dressrosa is basically a glowing red target on the Revolutionary Army's map. Here's the kicker. Doffy knows it. Imagine the paranoia. He's already terrified of the national treasure of Marie Joieuse being exposed. Now add the knowledge that if he slips, if he leaks the wrong secret or becomes too loud of a liability, the man who can solo entire kingdoms might personally show up. How does a control freak react when there's one person he cannot control? He accelerates everything. So Doflamingo doesn't just lean on Kaido, he sprints. He pushes Caesar to ramp up Smile production faster, forces the factory workers harder, and reaches out through the underworld to test the waters with Blackbeard's camp way earlier. What if he tries to sell intel on Dragon or the revolutionaries to teach? Hoping to weaponize the next rising Yonko against the world's strongest before Dragon can close in? Now, drop Sabo into that pressure cooker. In the original timeline, Sabo shows up for the Mera no Mi, clashes with Fujitora, and dips. In this timeline, his role expands instantly. He's not just Luffy's brother and Dragon's chief of staff. He's the visible edge of an invisible blade. Every Marine and every CP0 agent on Dressrosa has one thought. If this escalates too far, Dragon might descend. That changes how the Marines move. Fujitora becomes way more cautious, constantly weighing justice against the risk of provoking Dragon. CP0 doesn't swagger in to protect Doflamingo's secrets. They slink in, terrified that any misstep could trigger a revolutionary raid. Even the Gorosei are glued to the transponder snails, watching Dressrosa like a ticking bomb. And right in the center of that, Luffy. Before, he was just toppling tyrants one by one. But now he knows his dad is out there toppling systems. So every punch he throws at Doflamingo carries a second layer. He's not only freeing a country, he's subconsciously competing with Dragon's revolution. Can a pirate crew liberate a nation without the strongest man stepping in? Can Luffy prove that the will of D can reshape the world on its own terms? Dressrosa becomes a microcosm of the entire story. Every smile shipped out is a bet that Kaido can stand against Dragon. Every toy slave is a reminder of why the revolutionaries exist. Every lie Doflamingo broadcasts to the world is the government desperately trying to control the narrative before Dragon rewrites it. And as the birdcage closes and Gear 4 roars to life, one question hangs over the rubble. Who will the world credit for this fallen celestial dragon puppet? Monkey D. Luffy or Monkey D. Dragon? Because the answer to that decides how the next island reacts when the revolutionaries and the Straw Hats both come knocking. Wano without isolation, Kaido faces the Storm King. So when the dust settles in Dressrosa and the world argues over the name Monkey D on the headlines, our next stop is the one island Dragon cannot afford to leave in the dark. Wano. You see, in the original timeline, Wano is this closed-off samurai nation that Luffy liberates mostly on his own terms. The world government pretends it doesn't exist. Kaido turns it into his personal weapons factory, and Dragon stays in the shadows. But what if the strongest man in the world sees Wano not just as another oppressed country, but as a keystone to the final war? In this timeline, Dragon has already connected the dots. A country that refused to join the world government. Ancient stone tablets, rumors that Pluton once slept beneath its soil. That's not just some exotic backdrop for a Yonko fight. That's a ticking time bomb tied directly to the Void Century. So Kaido turning Wano into a fortress isn't just piracy anymore. It's the beast pirates sitting on top of one of the world's biggest secrets. Dragon cannot ignore that forever. So what happens? Let's dive into the revolutionary angle. Before Luffy ever sails into the land of Wano, Dragon is already there, just not in person. Koala, Sabo, or a new wind-themed commander infiltrates through Kuri's coastline, vanishing into the snow and Sakura. They make contact with the scattered retainers, with Kinemon and the remnants of Odin's loyalists, and Wano quietly becomes more than a rebellion against Orochi. It becomes a future staging ground, a place where, once Kaido falls, Dragon can base operations to strike directly at Mariajoie and the Celestial Dragons. This changes everything about the Onigashima raid. In the original timeline, the Alliance feels like a desperate gamble. In this timeline, there are revolutionary spotters feeding intel, sabotaging Smile factories, freeing prisoners in Udon not just for Luffy's sake, but to prep an army that won't bow to the world government afterward. And then comes the moment everyone's been waiting for. Kaido actually meets the Storm King. Picture the rooftop. Thunder Bagua swings down. Luffy's there. On Zoro's there. Law, kid, killer. But then the sky bends. Wind pressure slams everyone to their knees as a single silhouette walks through Kaido's Boro breath like it's morning fog. Dragon doesn't launch a full war. He doesn't steal Luffy's fight. He just throws one punch. One hockey-coated, atmosphere-cracking blow that collides with Kaido's Kanabo and splits Onagashima's clouds wider than even their cannon clash. Kaido feels it. For the first time, he's not wondering whether Joy Boy will entertain him. He's wondering who this monster is that could have killed him if he'd meant it. Is he thrilled? Is he enraged? Both. Instantly. Here's the kicker. Dragon pulls back. Because his goal isn't to personally execute Kaido. It's to free Wano's people, secure whatever poneglyphs and Pluton intel lie beneath, and make sure this country doesn't fall from one tyrant to another world government protector. So he focuses on collapsing Orochi's regime, shredding CP0's backup plans, and locking down the borders on revolutionary terms. While Luffy, in peak shonen fashion, earns the right to be the man who defeated Kaido. Wano becomes the perfect mirror. Dragon fights for the shape of the world. Luffy fights for the smiles in front of him. Same battlefield, different end goals, both necessary. But if Wano is now a revolutionary fortress built on forbidden history, how does the world government respond when their greatest fear plants his flag right above Pluton's cradle? The final war blueprint, 2 fronts, 1 storm. The world government can't ignore that. They don't send a buster call. They don't send an admiral. As they redraw the entire endgame, in the original timeline, the final war is framed as Luffy, his allies, and the Straw Hat Grand Fleet crashing into the world government in one insane all-or-nothing clash. 1 front, 1 storm. But what if Dragon is not just the most wanted man, but the strongest man alive, already holding Wano and Pluton's cradle as a revolutionary fortress? In this timeline, the final war splits in 2. Front 1. The sky above Mary Joai's tears open. Dragon leads the full revolutionary army in a direct assault on the Holy Land itself. Sabo, Ivankov, Kuma's restored body, the commanders, even defected marines like Kuzan and Garp rally behind him. Front 2. Out on the sea, Luffy and the Straw Hat Grand Fleet charge into the last pirate gauntlet. Blackbeard, surviving Yonko remnants. And any wild cards who still want to rule the waves. Let's dive into how insane that battlefield map looks. You have the revolutionary army and liberated kingdoms rising from every blue, answering Dragon's call. You have the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, Ace's old allies, Whitebeard remnants, and even former warlords who've chosen freedom over titles. On top of that, you see defected Marines, Smoker, Kobe, maybe even Fujitora, turning their cannons around. All of that slams into the world government's core: admirals, CP0, Seraphim, God's Knights, the Gorosei, Imu, and any ancient weapon defenses they've been hiding. Here's the kicker. Dragon doesn't stay in the shadows. He's the spearhead. He personally storms Mary Joyce, taking on Imu and the Gorosei head-on, while weather-warping gales rip apart pacifista lines and flip entire battleships. If Uranus or some sky-based ancient weapon exists, it fires at him first, because he's engineered it that way. Dragon uses his status as the strongest as a shield, drawing every god-tier attack away from the rest of the world. So where does that leave Luffy? While Dragon crushes the symbolic and literal heart of oppression, Luffy's lane is the ocean itself. His job is to end the pirate era's last tyrants. Blackbeard with stolen devil fruits and darkness, any rogue Shanks branch where the red-haired legend can't let go of the old balance, plus stray Yonko remnants clinging to power. If the seas stay chained by fear of emperors, the revolution means nothing, right? 2 Ds, 2 storms. Dragon's revolution destroys the cage. Mary Joyce, the celestial dragon system, the secret throne. Luffy's journey fills that open sky with real freedom, proving that when the dust settles, the strongest voices on the sea are not conquerors, but dreamers. But if Dragon is busy tearing down the heavens, and Luffy is rewriting the laws of piracy, who steps into the vacuum to decide what the new world government even looks like? Dragon versus Imu. The strongest man challenges the empty throne. And that question takes us straight into the darkest room in the entire world. Deep beneath Pangaea Castle, past the celestial dragon chambers and the corridors the Gorosei think they own, there's that silent hall with the empty throne. In the original timeline, we barely see it. It's a symbol. A lie that no one rules the world. But what if Dragon, the strongest man alive in this timeline, walks straight into that lie and finds the person sitting above it all? The doors don't open. They explode. The wind hits like a Yonko's Conqueror's blast. Stained glass shatters, tapestries rip off the walls, and those swords from the 20 kings rattle in their stone. At the top of the steps, framed against the empty throne, Imu finally stands. No more silhouette, no more shadow. The thing Dragon's entire life has been aiming at is suddenly real. Here's the kicker. Imu isn't just some frail monarch hiding behind CP0. You see, to control 800 years of history, you need more than authority. In this timeline, Imu's body hums with a power that feels wrong, like a devil fruit that shouldn't exist. Reality itself bends around them. Columns stretch and twist, Dragon's cape flickers between present and erased, and even sound cuts out in patches as an invisible force rewrites the room. Is it an ancient weapon fragment fused to their will? And a reality-bending paramecia that can delete possibilities? Or a form of haki so advanced it distorts perception, forcing everyone to see only the world Imu approves? Whatever it is, it's strong enough that even the strongest man in One Piece has to take a step forward and actually focus. Dragon answers with storms. His haki floods the hall, black lightning crackling through the sacred ceiling. A hurricane forms indoors, shredding the red carpet, slamming those 20 swords into the walls like thrown spears. The red line itself trembles as pressure waves rip outward, making Mary Joyce shake like Marineford when Whitebeard cracked the sea. Imu raises a hand. Whole sections of the battlefield just vanish. A chunk of floor under Dragon's feet is erased from existence, turning his dash into a freefall. A gust of his own wind is rewound and sent back at him, compressed into a needle that could pierce even Kaido's scales. And while they clash, Dragon talks. He throws Joy Boy's name like a weapon. He hurls the Void Century into the open, calling this fight the rematch of an ancient war that Joy Boy lost. He says the will of D isn't a bloodline curse. It's the memory of that failure, carried forward until someone strong enough can finish the job. In this timeline, that someone isn't a pirate emperor. It's the world's most wanted man, standing where no one was ever supposed to stand. But what if even that isn't enough? For a heartbeat, Imu's power bites through the storm. Part of Dragon's arm flickers, like it's being edited out of the story. Blood hits the empty throne. The camera could cut right here, and you'd swear Dragon might not walk out at all. And that's exactly where Luffy's role, and the true shape of the final war, comes crashing in next. The cost of being the strongest, sacrifice, legacy, and the will of D-Dragon doesn't fall. He staggers. The air screams. Reality knits his arm back together with a storm of microscopic blades. But you see, the second Imu draws Dragon's blood, the story quietly answers a question we've been dancing around this whole timeline. What is the cost of being the strongest in the world? In the original timeline, the monsters of an era don't retire. They die. Roger turns himself in to light the match for the Great Pirate Era. Whitebeard dies at Marineford to declare that One Piece is real and shove the world into chaos. The top of the mountain is a graveyard. It's not a throne. So if Dragon has surpassed Kaido, Shanks, and even Imu in raw influence and threat, what if the narrative is already sharpening the knife for him too? Let's dive into Dragon's possible endings in this timeline, because each one changes everything. First, the cleanest cut. Dragon defeats Imu outright and dies doing it. Imagine the final clash. Imu trying to erase the world, Dragon turning the sky itself into a shield. Wind blades shredding the red line as both vanish in a storm that blinds everyone. Luffy wins the war, but the strongest D of the age dies where no crown can reach him. Or Dragon lives, but at a price. Gravely wounded, missing that arm for real this time. Lungs scarred from clashing with a god's fire. He walks off the stage, not because he's weak, but because he refuses to let the world lean on him again. Now, here's the kicker. Dragon could choose to disappear, to erase himself from the board so no one rebuilds a new world government around his strength. How does that hit Luffy? This is the kid who grew up resenting an absent father, joking that Dragon never did anything for him. Then, in the final war, he watches that same man bleed, so he can laugh freely on the sea. Whether Dragon dies or vanishes, Luffy suddenly inherits more than Shanks' hat. He inherits a world his father cracked open with his own life. Does Luffy celebrate? Or does he cry on the deck of the Sunny, realizing freedom came with a bill he can't repay? And Ace and Sabo? In this timeline where Ace survived Marineford, Ace hears about Dragon's fate and instantly understands the assignment. Whitebeard died to protect the new age. Dragon dies or retires, to break the throne itself. Ace honors both by sailing as a free pirate emperor, hunting down anyone trying to rebuild oppression. Sabo, on the other hand, steps into Dragon's exact shadow, taking command of the Revolutionary Army, using his Mera Mera no Mi and Dragon's teachings to fight in the light instead of the dark. Together, they split Dragon's will of D-Ace becomes the storm on the sea. Sabo becomes the flame in the nations. So when history looks back, Dragon isn't remembered as the strongest man in One Piece. He's the D who refused a crown, the storm that shattered the idea that power belongs to a hidden few. But what if the world he leaves behind still isn't ready for that freedom? Because the next threat waiting in the shadows of that broken throne is where this timeline gets even crazier. Does a strongest tier dragon undermine Luffy or complete him? And that next threat raises the big meta question for all of us. If Dragon is secretly the strongest in the world, does that steal Luffy's thunder? If Dad is already out here boxing Imu and snapping celestial dragons like twigs, does becoming Pirate King suddenly feel like the Junior League? On the surface, it sounds like it. You see Dragon rewriting the entire political map, toppling kings, forcing the Gorosei to crawl out of Mariejua, and you wonder, where does that leave the rubber kid who just wants meat and freedom? In the original timeline, Luffy feels like the destined world shaker. But what if, in this timeline, Dragon's feats are even crazier than anything we've seen from Kaido or Shanks? Doesn't that make Luffy's dream look smaller? Here's the kicker. It actually makes their roles sharper, not redundant. Dragon's strength is aimed at systems. He's the guy who looks at the entire world government, CP0, Seraphim, God's Knights, Imu on the empty throne, and says, I'm going to break the machine. Luffy breaks chains on people. He walks into Sabaody, Fishman Island, Dressrosa, Wano, and frees individuals, islands, and even Yonko crews from fear, from promises, from their own regrets. So while Dragon storms the reverie and rips the mask off the celestial dragons, Luffy is out there turning enemies into brothers. Law, Kid, former warlords like Hancock, even ex-Yonko commanders like Marco. These people don't rally because Dragon told them to. They rally because Luffy crashed into their lives and refused to let them stay the same. Think about Marineford reimagined. In this timeline, Dragon might be the one who stops Akainu's fist with a single gust of wind, but it's Luffy whose scream for Ace silences the entire battlefield. It's Luffy whose insanity inspires Whitebeard's last charge, whose presence makes even Sengoku and Garp hesitate. The world doesn't chant Dragon, Dragon. They chant Straw Hat, because that will to charge forward is uniquely his, and Luffy keeps stacking unique achievements. He turns Big Mom from an untouchable Yonko into a rival who has to respect his threat level. He turns Mihawk's curiosity into genuine interest. He drags people like Crocodile, Buggy, and even former enemies in Impel Down into his orbit. Dragon can overthrow a kingdom. Luffy can change a person. Now, if Dragon is strong enough to clash evenly with Imu, that doesn't cap Luffy. It raises his ceiling. And for Luffy to truly become the freest man on the seas, he can't just stand next to that level. He has to surpass it. Suddenly, Gear 5 isn't the finish line. It's the starting gun for a race whose endpoint is stronger than the man who challenged God. How insane does Luffy's peak have to be for that to be true? So this what if doesn't replace Luffy's story. It reframes it. It becomes the tale of a son who looks at his father's revolution, nods, and then walks a completely different path. Pirate, friend, idiot hero, and still ends up changing the world in a way only he could. And the real twist is who he has to face next, when both those paths finally collide with the same enemy. Alternate timelines. Rapid fire. Other ways a strongest dragon could break canon. And that's just one path. To really feel how central Dragon's strength is, you have to rapid fire through timelines where he doesn't stay in the shadows at all. First one, Logue Town. In the original timeline, Luffy is about to be executed. Lightning strikes, and Smoker has him dead to rights before that mysterious gust of wind appears. But what if Dragon didn't hide? In this timeline, he walks straight out of the storm, coat whipping, Conqueror's Haki detonating across the town. Smoker tries to grab Luffy and just drops to his knees. Marines are fainting. Tashiki can't even draw her sword. The execution platform shatters from a casual wind-coated backhand. Luffy doesn't just see a stranger saving him, he sees the strongest man in the world crush a Marine base without even looking serious. How does that change him? Does he still treat Dragon like a distant idea? Or does he set his sights on surpassing his dad from day one? You see how the rivalry energy between pirate son and revolutionary father suddenly goes nuclear. Second route, the Stolen Arcs timeline. In the original story, Alabasta and Dressrosa are Luffy's big statements against corrupt kings and warlords. But what if Dragon got there first? Imagine Crocodile's palace already ripped open by wind blades, Baroque works dismantled overnight, Vivi's rebellion guided by revolutionary tacticians instead of a rookie pirate crew. Luffy arrives hyped for a war and finds a liberated kingdom flying the revolutionary flag. Or Dressrosa, Doflamingo's birdcage already torn apart, toys turned back to humans by Sabo and Koala, and Dragon himself forcing CP0 to retreat. Luffy has to ask, if the biggest villains are being erased off the map by his father, what's his role now? Is he just chasing scraps behind the real world changer? That one tweak alone pushes Luffy to aim higher, faster, just to keep up. Third, let's dive into the Split Straw Hats timeline. What if Dragon doesn't just save random people, he recruits from Luffy's future crew? Zoro meets him before Shell's Town and hears, "Use that sword against the world government, not for some random pirate." Does Zoro become Dragon's right hand instead of Luffy's first mate? Or Robin, in Ohara's aftermath, gets taken in directly by Dragon instead of ending up with Crocodile. Imagine Robin as the Revolutionary Army's chief historian, feeding Void Century intel into Dragon's war machine. Even Sanji works here. And Zeph is spared a government crackdown because Dragon's people intervene, and Sanji pledges his cooking and his kicks to the revolution first. Suddenly, the final war isn't the Straw Hats plus allies. It's a fractured family reuniting on opposite sides of the same battlefield. And here's the kicker. We haven't even touched the Yonko yet. What if Dragon and Shanks actually clash over ideology? Freedom through piracy versus structured revolution. Two top-tier hockey monsters meeting in some forgotten sea. Their conquerors' lightning splitting the sky, while the world never even hears about it. Shanks wants to preserve a delicate balance. Dragon wants to smash the system entirely. Who backs down? Does Shanks walk away with a scar that isn't from Blackbeard this time? All of these little what-if branches prove one thing. Making Dragon the absolute strongest doesn't just add a cool fight. It rewires almost every arc, every alliance, every legend. And the real question becomes, when a man that strong finally steps onto the same battlefield as Luffy, Ace's legacy, and the Yonko, who actually gets to decide how the world changes? Pattern break. Flipping the question. What if Dragon stayed weak? But what if we slam the brakes for a second and flip the whole thing upside down? What if Dragon isn't that strong? Not weak like a random marine, but weak compared to the monsters we've been talking about. In this timeline, Dragon isn't a walking natural disaster. He's the mastermind, the spy master, the guy who never steps onto the front lines because, physically, he can't hang with Kaido, Shanks, or an admiral. You see, his real weapon isn't a busted devil fruit or god-tier hockey. It's information, networks, commanders. In the original timeline, the world government calls him the world's most wanted man, and we all assume that means crazy power. But what if that title is about how dangerous his ideas are, not his fists? In this timeline, Sabo, Ivankov, Kuma, and the other top revolutionaries are the real fighters, while Dragon stays in the shadows, moving pieces like a chess grandmaster who'd get one shot in a real brawl. So now run Marineford again. Ace is on the platform. Luffy is bleeding out. Whitebeard is cracking the sky. In our strongest dragon scenario, he descends like a storm, right? But in this timeline, there is no storm-stopping entrance. No single gust of wind freezing Akainu mid-punch. Ice Dragon doesn't appear above the execution platform, doesn't clash with Sengoku, doesn't one man extract Luffy and Ace. Marineford plays out almost exactly as we remember. Ace dies, Whitebeard dies. Shanks is still the one who walks in to end the war. The Marines and the Yonko remain the visible pillars of the world, while Dragon is that distant rumor you hear about in news clippings. The Revolutionary Army feels like a background threat, not a force that can instantly flip the battlefield when it wants. Here's the kicker. The entire Revolutionary Army changes flavor. Instead of an organization that could someday stand toe-to-toe with admirals and even the Gorosei, it becomes a pure guerrilla network. Hit and run, kingdom topplings, sabotage. They never ever consider a direct clash at Mariéjois, because they know if an admiral squad pulls up, it's over. The final war in this version of the story shrinks. Less global clash of titans, more shadow rebellion, while the big boys fight on the surface. Emotionally, that hits different too. Luffy's family legacy becomes all about ideals. His grandpa, the hero. His dad, the revolutionary thinker. Luffy is the one freak who has both the will and the power. That's cool, that's thematic, that's very One Piece. But it doesn't give you that raw, hype-driven fantasy of, my dad could solo an admiral squad and still be home for dinner. And that contrast, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why the strongest dragon what if goes so hard. Once you've seen the weak dragon path, you instantly feel how much more the world shakes when the most wanted man is also the strongest. Alright, so let's dive back into that timeline and push it all the way to the final war. Character rewrites, Hancock, Mihawk, and the Warlords in a dragon-dominated era. So let's dive back into that timeline. Because once Dragon is the undisputed strongest, the Warlord system doesn't just crack, it melts. Every neutral monster is suddenly forced to look up at this one man shaking the sky and decide, are you with the throne or with the storm? Start with Boa Hancock. In the original timeline, she plays that delicate double game. A warlord on paper, a Luffy fangirl in practice, sneaking him into Marineford and turning a blind eye to his crimes. But what if her secret crush and the world's strongest revolutionary are now directly linked through blood? In this timeline, When Dragon's open assault on Marineford to save Ace and Luffy doesn't scare her. It liberates her. Amazon Lily instantly becomes more than a hidden island. It turns into a covert revolutionary harbor. Hancock still kicks Marines to the curb, but now those accidents are coordinated, sheltering freed slaves and defectors while Dragon's commanders quietly pass through Kuja territory. Then you have Mihawk, the ultimate lone wolf. In the original timeline, he tests Whitebeard, slices icebergs, and then dips the moment Shanks shows up. He respects strength and nothing else. So what happens when Dragon walks into Marineford, stops Akainu's magma punch with a casual wind barrier, and stares down 3 admirals like they're rookie pirates? You see, that's the exact kind of overwhelming presence that intrigues Mihawk. What he doesn't suddenly become a revolutionary, but his neutrality changes. In this timeline, when the world government leans on him to hunt Dragon's allies, he just doesn't move. Quiet refusal. No direct rebellion, but a subtle, terrifying message. The world's greatest swordsman is not swinging his blade for the celestial dragons anymore. On the other side of the chessboard, Doflamingo and Crocodile feel the ground shifting and react in the most self-serving way possible. Daffy, with his celestial dragon lineage, doubles down. If Dragon is the strongest man alive and is actively targeting the heavenly dragons, then Joker becomes even more vital as their underworld shield. He tightens his strings on Dressrosa, accelerates Smile production, and angles for direct protection from Imu's shadow. Crocodile? But he reads the room and instantly bets on chaos. After seeing Dragon humiliate Marineford, Crocodile starts sniffing around Blackbeard instead, looking to back the one pirate insane enough to counterbalance the revolutionary threat. But what if that alliance plants the seeds for a future war where Dragon and Teach are the 2 black holes pulling everyone in? And then there's Kuma. This is where it hurts. In the original timeline, Kuma's sacrifice is tragic. In this timeline, with Dragon at the absolute peak of the verse, it's infuriating. The strongest man in the world watches his closest friend turned into a mindless weapon, mass-produced as pacifistas to crush the very freedom he fights for. That pushes Dragon past strategic revolutionary into something harsher. Vegapunk's labs become priority targets. Sabo and the commanders aren't just toppling kings, they're hunting blueprints, dismantling PX units, and sabotaging the Seraphim project before it can fully replace the warlords. Here's the kicker. Dragon's power doesn't let anyone stay in the middle. Hancock, Mihawk, Daffy, Crocodile, Kuma, every ambiguous figure is dragged to one side of the coming storm. Neutrality dies at Marineford. But if the strongest man alive is forcing the world to choose, where does that leave the Yonko themselves when the final war actually begins? Marine heroes and traitors, Kobe, Smoker, and Fujitora in the New Age. And that question doesn't just hang over the Yonko, ladies and gentlemen. It slices straight through Marine HQ too. Because if Dragon is the strongest man alive, and every Marine with a conscience is suddenly forced to look in the mirror and ask, whose justice am I really serving? Let's dive into Kobe first. In the original timeline, Marineford was the moment he snapped, begging Akainu to stop the slaughter. But what if, in this timeline, his breakdown happens while Dragon is literally holding back an admiral's magma fist with one hand and shielding fleeing civilians with the other? Kobe isn't just hearing the drums of war. He's watching the world's most wanted man risk everything to save people the world government called collateral damage. You see, that changes his entire trajectory. Instead of quietly grinding his way up the ranks, Kobe becomes the kid who saw Dragon stop Marineford from becoming a genocide. He starts asking dangerous questions. Why is the pirate son of Garp's generation the one protecting innocents, while fleet admirals order buster calls? By the time we reach the final war, Kobe isn't just a rising hero, he's the bridge. The one Marine who can talk to Luffy, to Garp, and to Dragon, turning what should be a clean war into a messy, emotional family intervention. Now jump to Smoker. In the original timeline, he's already side-eyeing the world government, chasing Luffy because pirates are pirates, but never fully trusting the celestial dragon system. In this timeline, Smoker arrives at post-Marineford Islands and keeps hearing the same insane report. Dragon appeared. The Tyrant King is gone. The citizens were evacuated before the fight even started. Here's the kicker. That's exactly what Smoker always wanted Marines to be. the shield for the weak. And so when he finally clashes with Dragon in some ruined harbor, and Dragon's wind redirects Smoker's smoke away from a group of kids instead of going for the kill, Smoker is forced to confront a brutal question. Who actually represents justice now? The man with a coat that says "Justice" on the back, or the man the government calls a demon? Then there's Fujitora. In Dressrosa, he wanted the warlord system abolished. But what if, in this timeline, Dragon's Marineford stunt accelerates everything? The reverie happens under the shadow of the strongest man alive, openly toppling kings. Fujitora walks into those meetings already knowing Dragon's goal: crush the celestial dragon hierarchy. And instead of clashing with him later, Fujitora quietly orders his fleet to lose Dragon's trail, refusing to fight him directly. Suddenly, Marine HQ isn't a wall, it's a fault line. Akainu and hardliners scream for Dragon's head. Aokiji, already shaken, drifts toward Dragon's camp. Kobe, Smoker, Fujitora hover in the middle, turning internal debates into full-on schisms. This isn't a simple pirates versus Marines war anymore. It's Dragon's wind ripping the Marines themselves into factions, inspiring defections and secret alliances. But if the strongest man alive is quietly stealing the hearts of Marine heroes, what happens when the Yonko realize their enemies inside the Navy are starting to cheer for the same revolution? Symbol versus symbol, Dragon's flag and the Jolly Roger. And that's where the real clash starts. Not fist versus fist, but flag versus flag. You see, Dragon's banner isn't just a cool logo for a secret army. It's a declaration that the entire world balance is a scam. In the original timeline, the revolutionary flag already means rebellion, toppling kings, liberating islands. But in this timeline, where Dragon is the strongest man alive, that flag is a promise to erase the world government's monopoly on power and rewrite the social contract itself. No more celestial dragons at the top, no more Marines as the only legal force. He's saying, we decide the rules now. Now put that next to the Jolly Roger. Completely different energy. A pirate flag doesn't promise a new system. It promises no system. Individual freedom, adventure, doing what you want on the open sea. Luffy's Straw Hat Jolly Roger is the purest version of that. He doesn't want to rule the world. He wants to be the freest man in it. But what if that dream sits right between Dragon's structured revolution and pure pirate anarchy? Luffy hates oppression, but he also hates being told what to do, even by a good system. Let's dive into how Dragon being the strongest twists those symbols. When a random rebel waves that banner, the Gorosei call it idealism. When the man who can body a Kainu, clash evenly with Shanks, and walk through a Yonko crew flies it over Mary Joyce, that's not an idea anymore. That's a credible threat. Suddenly every kingdom has to ask, do we side with the flag that can actually win? Even pirates like Kid and Law are forced to acknowledge that the revolutionary mark might reshape the seas more than any Jolly Roger ever could. Here's the kicker, that power doesn't just inspire, it terrifies. A lot of pirates, even good ones, thrive in the chaos of the Yonko era. In this timeline, you have ex-warlords, supernovas, even reformed Marines who look at Dragon's new world and think, hold on, will there still be room for my kind of freedom? Does a revolution that abolishes celestial dragons also abolish the right to just sail, steal, and chase treasure without signing up to a cause? Do you want a world of flags you must pledge to, or flags you can ignore? That's where Luffy's symbol becomes the wild card. The Straw Hat doesn't stand for a faction. It stands for a feeling. For everyone watching this story unfold, the endgame isn't just about who smashes Imu or who wins the final war. It's about which symbol defines freedom after the world government falls. Is it Dragon's banner of organized liberation or Luffy's Jolly Roger of unchained adventure? And when those two flags finally fly over the same battlefield, whose definition of free wins? Microclimaxes, 3 pivotal moments that hit harder with the strongest dragon. And that clash of symbols doesn't just happen on giant battlefields. It sneaks into the quiet scenes too. The moments where no one's throwing punches, but everything in the story just tilts. Let's dive into 3 of those microclimaxes that hit way harder when Dragon is not just most wanted, but flat out the strongest man alive. First, Luffy and the Oxbell. In the original timeline, ringing it 16 times is this cryptic message to his crew, a clever signal only a few people decode. But what if, in this timeline, everyone thinks it's something else? The world sees the son of the strongest revolutionary standing over Marineford's ruins, tolling a war bell. But suddenly, it's read as a coordinated strike. Newspapers scream, "Dragon's son sends the signal." Fleet Admiral Sakazuki is losing his mind. Cypher Paul analysts are convinced Dragon planned this down to the second. You see, Luffy's just trying to talk to his friends, but the world thinks father and son are synchronizing their moves like a two-man apocalypse. That innocent act becomes an instant declaration of ideological war. Second, Sabo's memories. In the original timeline, when Sabo remembers Luffy and Ace, it's pure heartbreak and resolve. But in this timeline, there's an extra layer of dread. He doesn't just remember being saved by Dragon. He remembers the whispers, the man who can stop an admiral's magma fist with a single gust, the man even Kaido wouldn't test directly. Imagine Sabo sitting there, shaking, realizing the person who pulled him from the fire is the top of the food chain. If Dragon is above Shanks, above Kaido, above everyone, then what does that make Sabo's role as chief of staff? Is he the heir to a god-tier revolutionary, or the shield that has to stand between that monster of a father and Luffy's reckless freedom? Here's the kicker. Every time Sabo steps onto a battlefield now, it's not just Dragon's right hand has arrived. It's the apprentice of the strongest has chosen a side. That pressure changes every decision he makes. Third, Garp, alone after the war. In the original timeline, he's already torn up about Ace's death and Luffy's path. But what if his son is also the single greatest threat to the system he bled for? Garp isn't just the hero who let Roger live long enough to start the Great Pirate era. He's the father who let Dragon walk away, knowing how strong he was becoming, and the grandfather who watched Luffy charge Marineford. Now, with Dragon confirmed as the peak, every choice Garp didn't make hits harder. Could he have stopped Dragon early? Should he have pushed Luffy toward the Marines, knowing his dad might one day topple the world? These aren't big explosions, they're pressure points. Little scenes where Dragon's strength rewrites the emotional math. And if these quiet moments are already this loaded, what happens when all three men stand on the same battlefield and have to choose each other, or the world? Viewer challenge. Who is the true final enemy in a dragon-dominated world? And so if all three of them end up on that battlefield together, we have to ask something way bigger than who wins the fight. Who is the final enemy in a world where Dragon is the strongest man alive, because the contenders are stacked? On one side, you've got Imu, the hidden king of the shadows, the thing even the Gorosei bow to. On another, you've got the world government itself. The Buster Calls, the propaganda, the celestial dragons, the system that crushed Ohara and wiped the Void Century. Then there's Blackbeard, chaos incarnate, stealing powers, breaking every rule of the sea. And looming over all of that is Dragon, the man strong enough to blow the whole board off the table in a single move. But what if the real danger isn't just who's evil? It's who has too much power. In the original timeline, Ice Dragon is already the world's most wanted man. In this timeline, he's also the undisputed peak, above Kaido, above Shanks, above even whatever monster Imu is hiding. If one man can instantly topple the Marines, sink a fleet with a storm, and shatter Mariejua in a single campaign, what safeguards exist to stop him from becoming the next Imu, just with a different flag? Here's the kicker. Revolutions don't always end with freedom. Sometimes they end with a new throne. You see, if Dragon can crush Imu, rewrite the map, dismantle the celestial dragons, who tells him no? Sabo? Ivankov? Kuma? Are any of them stopping the guy who can solo an admiral squad and walk away? Or does the world quietly slide from world government tyranny into revolutionary security state, where everything is justified because the last regime was worse? And that's where Luffy kicks the door in. Is Luffy the necessary counterweight here? The pure, unstructured freedom that refuses to let any ideology, even dragons, dominate absolutely? In this timeline, Luffy grows up knowing his dad isn't just a legend. He's the storm that ends eras. So does Luffy become the one person who can punch his father in the face and hug him after? The living proof that no dream, no justice, no greater good gets to sit above individual freedom? So we have to ask you, in a dragon-dominated world, what does final boss even mean? Is it a person? Emu? Blackbeard? Dragon himself? Is it a system? The Marines? The Celestial Dragons? The entire idea of order through fear? Or is it an idea, the belief that someone must rule from above to keep the world from tearing itself apart? Let's dive into your endgame. In your ideal version of this what if, who stands as the last obstacle to true freedom? Is it Dragon refusing to step down? Blackbeard hijacking the chaos? Emu revealing a god-tier weapon that even Dragon fears? And when that final clash hits, is Luffy fighting beside his father, against him, or against the very world they both tried to change? Rapid recap, from Marineford Storm to Empty Throne Showdown. So before we answer that, let's lock in what this wild timeline actually did, because a lot changed, instantly. In the original timeline, Marineford ends with Whitebeard dead, Ace gone, Luffy broken, and Shanks walking in to cool everyone down. In this timeline, the pattern shatters the moment the sky goes dark and that impossible wind hits the plaza. Akainu's magma fist? Stopped mid-swing by a single gust. Kizaru's light beams? And scattered. Aokiji's ice? Shredded. Dragon doesn't sneak in. He arrives like a natural disaster. He walks through admirals, trades blows with Sengoku, and even makes Whitebeard look old for real. Garp's fist hangs in the air over Luffy, and drops. That's the choice that rewrites the age. Instead of watching his grandson die, he turns and decks Akainu clean across the plaza. Ace is unchained, Luffy is shielded, and suddenly everyone realizes the strongest man alive isn't Whitebeard anymore. The war doesn't end because Shanks talks. It ends because Dragon crushes Marineford's will to keep fighting. From there, the whole world map gets scrambled. The Revolutionary Army stops being a shadow rumor and becomes a front-page reality. Kingdoms that were too afraid to move now openly fly Dragon's flag. Sabo, Ivankov, Kuma, and even ex-Admiral Kuzan become the new four commanders people whisper about. The Yonko have to recalibrate overnight. Kaido can't just drink and wait. Big Mom starts probing the revolutionaries instead of the supernovas. Even Shanks has to meet Dragon as an equal, not a distant ally. Meanwhile, the reverie turns into a powder keg. In the original timeline, it's politics and secret assassinations. In this timeline, Dragon storms the Holy Land. We watch him clash directly with the Gorosei, testing that insane hockey against their mysterious powers, while Emu responds with increasingly brutal countermeasures. Buster calls on rebel kingdoms, awakened seraphim, God's knights unleashed in broad daylight. Every time the world government escalates, Dragon tears down another pillar of their system. And through all of that, Aunt Luffy is growing in the shadow of the strongest father in the world. Training hits different when your benchmark is the man who soloed Marineford. Luffy still sails as a pirate, still builds the Straw Hat family, but his dream evolves. Not just Pirate King, but the man who can stand eye to eye with Dragon and still laugh. While Dragon topples thrones from above, Luffy liberates islands from below. Alabasta style, Dressrosa style, but now with the world watching every move. That sets up the endgame. Dragon versus Emu at the Empty Throne, wind and darkness tearing apart the very symbol of world order. Luffy versus Blackbeard and the last pirate monsters trying to hijack the chaos. And hanging over everything is one question. What kind of world is born when the strongest man alive fights not for a crown, but to destroy it? You see? As that's the through line of this entire what if. What happens when the most dangerous man in the world is also the strongest? And he chooses revolution over piracy. Let's dive into how that final clash could actually play out. And who, when the dust settles, still has the strength to call themselves free. Final reflection: why a strongest dragon fits one piece more than you think. And that's where this what if hits you harder than any punch Dragon could throw. Because Dragon being the strongest man in the world doesn't break One Piece's logic at all. It actually tightens it. It takes the existing themes, freedom versus order, inherited will, generations clashing, and just dials them up until the entire timeline is screaming. In the original timeline, the strongest is usually tied to pirates, Whitebeard, Kaido, the Yonko system, as power is framed as who can hold territory, who can survive the new world. But what if the strongest person alive rejected the sea entirely and chose revolution instead? Suddenly, strength isn't about who sits on a throne. It's about who has the will to flip the throne over and burn the palace down. That's Dragon. His power amplifies the idea that true strength in One Piece is the courage to chase freedom, even when the entire world calls you a criminal. And when you plug that into the family tree, it gets crazy. You see Garp, Dragon, and Luffy become this three-generation spectrum of the same D-shaped spark. Garp chooses justice inside the system, trying to bend the Marines without breaking them. Dragon chooses rebellion, walking away from that uniform to tear the system down. Luffy chooses pure adventure, on ignoring both sides and sailing to the ends of the world. In this timeline, Dragon being the absolute peak doesn't overshadow Luffy, it reframes him. Luffy isn't just chasing Roger's ghost, he's racing his own father's legend. Here's the kicker. It also makes the world government way scarier. If a man who could stalemate a Yonko crew by himself is still labeled the world's most wanted, what does that say about the monsters sitting on the empty throne? If they're this terrified of Dragon, even knowing how strong he is, then Imu, the Gorosei, the God's Knights, whatever they're hiding, instantly feel more credible as final villains. The ceiling gets higher, not lower. Emotionally, though, the payoff is where this what if really lands. You've watched Dragon do nothing for 1,000 episodes. A storm in Logetown here, a shadowy meeting there. Then, in this timeline, when he finally steps onto the battlefield at full power, it doesn't feel like a random deus ex machina. It feels like the bill coming due on decades of off-screen work. Every kingdom toppled, every agent lost, every secret dug up in the Void Century, all condense into that one moment where the wind itself bends around his will. Tell me that wouldn't be one of the most cathartic reveals in shonen history. And whether Oda ever goes that far or not, this what if taps into the core fantasy of One Piece, that somewhere out there, a storm is brewing that will wash away 800 years of lies. The question is, when that storm finally hits, is it Dragon's wind that blows the world apart, or Luffy's drums that decide what gets built from the rubble next? G, your turn. Build your own Dragon timeline. So now it's your turn, ladies and gentlemen. We've laid out one crazy Dragon-centric timeline. But what if you took the pen and rewrote just one moment? Pick your battlefield. Marineford, Reverie, Wano, or the final war itself. You see, one tiny scene changed is all it takes for the entire story to spiral into a completely different world. Start with Marineford. In the original timeline, Shanks walks in and ends the war. But what if it's Dragon who appears on that burning bay instead? The strongest character alive. Who does he save first? Ace, Luffy, or even Garp? Does he one-shot Akainu with a single wind-coated punch, or clash with Sengoku in a conqueror's hockey storm that splits the sky? Tell us in the comments what happens instantly after that entrance, and how the balance of power collapses from there, or jump to the Reverie. In this timeline, does Dragon crash the Holy Land during Imu's audience, dragging the most secret figure in the world into the light? Does he blow the Pangaea castle roof clean off, forcing the Gorosei to fight in front of every king? Who walks away from that throne room? Dragon, Imu, or no one at all? Maybe you want Wano. Imagine Kaido roaring that he's the strongest creature in the world, and Dragon just appears above Onigashima, wind blades cutting through Boro breath like it's nothing. Does he ally with Luffy, or flex as an enemy of all tyrants, Yonko included? Does he free Wano for the revolutionaries instead of the Straw Hats, changing Luffy's entire growth path and pride, or skip everything and go straight to the final war? Picture Luffy's drums of liberation shaking the world, while Dragon takes the sky, clashing with Imu in a storm that tears apart the Red Line itself. Who do you put on that battlefield, and who delivers the final blow that ends 800 years of lies? And here's the kicker. Do you like Dragon better as the shadow mastermind, the mysterious strategist who never fully reveals his hand, or as the absolute strongest fighter stepping right into the spotlight and soloing top tiers on screen? comment Shadow Dragon or Spotlight Dragon, and then explain your ideal version. Power Scalers, let's dive into the chaos. Where do you rank Dragon against Kaido, Shanks, and Imu in your what if? What devil fruit or pure hockey feats do you give him to justify it? A mythical wind god Zoan that controls climate? Future Sight plus island-busting Ryuo? Or drop your builds. Reply to each other. Stitch ideas together. Build branching timelines where one person's Marineford Dragon meets another person's Reverie Dragon. And if you want more what-ifs like this, hit subscribe, share this with that one friend who always says Dragon solos. And get ready. Because next up we're asking, what if Garp never became a Marine? Or Blackbeard ate the Gomu Gomu instead of Luffy? Last question. If Dragon is the strongest, does Luffy still win? But before we wrap this whole timeline up, we have to ask the last uncomfortable question. If Dragon is undeniably the strongest, does Luffy actually win in the end? Because what does winning even mean in One Piece? Is it beating the final boss in a one-on-one? Is it sitting on the Pirate King's throne? Or is it something way more intangible? Like whose dream actually defines the new era when the dust finally settles? In the original timeline, we all assume Luffy surpasses everyone through sheer will, Gear 5, and that Nika joy that makes the world itself laugh. But what if, in this timeline, Dragon really is the peak? Stronger than Kaido, above Shanks, the one man who can walk into Mary Joyce, clash with the Gorosei and Imu, and walk out while the Holy Land is literally collapsing behind him. If that's true, then Luffy's win can't just be about punching harder than his dad. It becomes a clash of dreams. Dragon's dream is structured revolution. Abolish the celestial dragons, expose the Void Century, build a new world order where tyranny can't grow back. Luffy's dream is pure, chaotic freedom. No one on the throne, no one telling anyone what to do. Everyone chasing their own adventure. So here's the kicker. When you all argue power scaling, who actually wins the story? The strongest man who breaks the world, or the freest man who rebuilds it? Let's dive into that final scene. Close your eyes for a second and picture the end of this what if. Is it Luffy on the Pirate King's throne, laughing, with the straw hats around him, while Dragon stands in the crowd like Garp at Marineford, smiling because his son became the freest man on the seas, even if he never surpassed him in raw strength? Or do you see Dragon on the front lines of the last war, tearing down the Red Line, while Luffy sails away, Pirate King by title but passenger in a world his father reshaped? Or, ladies and gentlemen, do we go even further? No empty throne, no Pirate King's singular seat. Or is Dragon and Luffy standing together on a world where the idea of one person above everyone is gone? Dragon the storm that ended the old era, Luffy the sun that defines the new one. When you talk endgame matchups from now on, Luffy versus Akainu, Dragon versus Imu, Straw Hats plus Revolutionaries versus God's Knights, don't just ask who wins the fight. Ask whose ideal wins the era. Whose flag do you want flying over the world when the last chapter turns? Because in this timeline, Dragon is the strongest man who broke the world. Luffy is the freest man who rebuilt it. If you had to pick just one legacy to carry forward, which one are you choosing? Answer that down below. Argue about it, build whole new what-ifs from it. And we'll see you in the next timeline.